Okay, picture this insanity for a second. What if Luffy wasn't just some village kid who ate a weird fruit? What if he's actually, wait for it, a secret celestial dragon? I know, sounds crazy, right? But think about it, those world nobles literally have cheat codes for life. One word from them and entire marine fleets bow down. Now imagine that kind of authority, but he's being mentored by Doflamingo, the most manipulative bastard in the series. The psychological warfare here is just chef's kiss. We're talking about the guy who fights for freedom discovering he's part of the ultimate oppression machine. And Doflamingo, he'd absolutely love corrupting someone that pure. So this story. Luffy finds out about his bloodline, gets sucked into Doflamingo's twisted world of power politics, and slowly starts becoming everything he once fought against. But here's the kicker, he's doing it to protect his crew. The road to hell, paved with good intentions and all that. Hit that like if you're ready for some psychological damage, and let's jump in. The nightmare always started the same way. Luffy stood on the execution platform at Marineford again, watching Ace's smile fade as the magma fist burst through his chest. The smell of burning flesh. The sound of his own voice screaming until his throat bled. And always, that moment when Ace's Vivre card crumbled to ash in his trembling fingers. Luffy, he jolted awake, sweat-soaked and gasping. Chopper's worried face hovered inches from his own, the reindeer's eyes wide with concern. Another one? Chopper asked softly. Luffy nodded, not trusting his voice. 6 months. 6 months since Marineford, and the dreams still came every night like clockwork. He rubbed his eyes, trying to scrub away the images that clung to him like spider webs. Your heart rate is still elevated, Chopper said, pressing his hoof to Luffy's wrist. And you're running a slight fever again. Luffy, you need to let me. I'm fine. The words came out harsher than he intended. Chopper flinched and Luffy immediately felt like garbage. Sorry, I'm okay, Chopper, really. But he wasn't okay and they both knew it. The recovery island they'd found was perfect, really. Hidden in the calm belt, lush with fruit trees, fresh water springs, and absolutely no marines in sight. Robin had discovered it in some old text about forgotten paradises, and for the past month, it had been exactly what they needed. Sanji was slowly putting weight back on Luffy's frame. Nami had color in her cheeks again. Even Zoro seemed less wound up, though he still practiced his swordsmanship with an intensity that suggested he was working through his own demons. They all were. Luffy pulled on his sandals and stumbled out of the men's quarters. Dawn was breaking over the island, painting everything in soft gold and pink. Usually, the sight would have made him smile. Now it just reminded him of fire. Captain's up early again. Robin sat on the deck's edge, a cup of coffee steaming in her hands. She'd taken to staying up late and rising early, as if sleep was something she'd rather avoid. They had that in common now. Can't sleep, Luffy said, settling beside her. The dreams, he nodded. Robin was the only one who didn't push him to talk about it, which somehow made it easier to actually talk about it. Ace used to have nightmares too, he found himself saying. When we were kids, about his father, about being unwanted, I'd sneak into his bed and we'd stay up telling stupid stories until he forgot. And now, Luffy's hands clenched into fists. Now there's nobody to tell me stupid stories. Robin's expression softened. There are 8 people on this ship who would tell you stories until their voices gave out if you asked. It's not the same. No, she agreed quietly. It's not. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. Somewhere in the forest, Usopp was probably setting his usual perimeter traps. Sanji would be starting breakfast soon, the smell of bacon and eggs drifting across the deck. Normal things, safe things. So when the explosion came, it shattered more than just the morning quiet. Luffy was on his feet before the smoke cleared, rubber limbs coiled and ready. A section of the forest was burning, trees splintered like matchsticks, and walking out of the flames came a figure that made Robin's breath catch. Cipher Pol, she whispered. The man was tall, lean, dressed in the standard black suit despite the blood soaking through his shirt. He moved wrong, like something inside was broken, but his eyes were focused and sharp as blades. In his hand, he clutched a transponder snail. Monkey D. Luffy, he called, his voice carrying across the clearing. I need to speak with you. Like hell, Sanji appeared from the kitchen, his leg already wreathed in flames. Nobody invited you government dogs here. Wait, Luffy held up a hand, something in the man's tone giving him pause. You're hurt. Dying, actually, the agent said with a bitter laugh. Shot 3 times in the chest, internal bleeding, maybe 20 minutes left. Funny how that changes your perspective on things. The rest of the crew was gathering now, Zoro with his swords already half-drawn, Nami clutching her climb-attacked, Frankie's arms transforming into cannons. Battle-ready like they'd been trained to be, like Marineford had taught them to be, but the agent just stood there, blood dripping from his fingers onto the sand. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm here because I'm tired of carrying secrets for dead men." "What secrets?" Robin demanded, stepping forward despite Zoro's warning growl. The agent's laugh turned into a cough that brought up blood. "The kind that get you killed for knowing them, the kind that explain why a celestial dragon's son is running around playing pirate." The world went very, very quiet. Luffy felt his heart stop. Actually stop like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." The agent wiped blood from his mouth. "Monkey D. Luffy, son of Monkey D. Dragon. And Saint Rossward's daughter, Lady Celestia, born 18 years ago in secret, given to Vice Admiral Garp to hide the scandal. Congratulations, kid, you're one of the world nobles you've spent your life fighting." "You're lying." The words felt like ash in Luffy's mouth. "I wish I was." The agent reached into his jacket, moving slowly to avoid getting shot. "Spent 15 years guarding this secret, killing people who got too close to the truth. But funny thing about dying makes you want to clear your conscience." He pulled out a folder, thick with documents and photographs. His hands were shaking now, whether from blood loss or nerves, Luffy couldn't tell. Birth certificate. DNA records, photos of your mother, she had your eyes, by the way, and this. He held up a small transponder snail, different from the one in his other hand. "Recording of Garp and Dragon arguing about what to do with you. Made it myself, insurance policy. Turns out insurance doesn't mean much when your own people put bullets in your back." Luffy's legs gave out. He hit the deck hard but barely felt it. Celestial Dragon. The words bounced around in his skull like rubber balls, not quite settling anywhere they made sense. "No," Nami whispered, her voice high and tight. "No, that's not. Luffy isn't like them. He can't be like them. The blood doesn't lie, sweetheart." The agent's voice was getting weaker. "Why do you think he can use Conqueror's Haki? Why do you think people follow him so naturally? It's in his genes, the divine right to rule, bred into him like a thoroughbred horse." "Shut up." Sanji's kick sent the agent flying into a tree, but the man just laughed as he slid down the trunk. "Hit me all you want, Cook. Doesn't change what he is." "Luffy." Chopper was at his side, small hooves gentle on his shoulders. "Luffy, it's okay. It doesn't matter where you came from, you're still our captain." But Luffy wasn't listening. He was remembering things. The way Marines sometimes hesitated before attacking him, like they recognized something in his face. How easily he'd commanded the prisoners at Impel Down. The strange dreams he'd had as a child, of golden palaces and people bowing. "The mother," Robin said suddenly, her historian's mind cutting through the shock. "Lady Celestia, what happened to her?" The agent's smile was all blood and bitterness. "Executed, of course. Soon as the 5 elders found out about the pregnancy. Can't have celestial dragon blood running wild in the world. Well," he looked at Luffy. "Most of it anyway." "You're saying they killed his mother?" Zoro's voice was deadly quiet. "I'm saying they killed everyone who knew, except Dragon, who disappeared before they could catch him, and Garp, who was too useful to waste, and me." The agent coughed again, more blood. "Who was supposed to clean up the loose ends. Instead, I've been watching you for years, kid. Watching you prove that blood isn't everything." The folder slipped from his fingers, documents scattering in the wind. Photos fluttered past Luffy's face, a young woman with his exact smile, her arm around a man in a celestial dragon's bubble helmet. Birth certificates stamped with the world government seal. Medical records that confirmed what Luffy's heart was already screaming couldn't be true. "Why?" Luffy's voice was barely a whisper. "Why tell me this? Because they're coming." The agent's eyes were starting to glaze, but his voice gained sudden strength. "Other agents, cleanup crew. My handler figured out I went rogue, sent them to finish what I started. They'll be here within the hour, and their orders are simple: eliminate all witnesses to the celestial dragon bastard's existence." "Bastard," Nami snarled. "That's what they call him in the files." The agent was slumping now, his life leaking away with every breath. "The bastard prince, the straw hat mistake, the thing that shouldn't exist." His eyes found Luffy's one last time. "But you know what, kid? I've seen what you've done, who you've saved, the lives you've changed, and I think maybe some mistakes are worth making." He died with those words on his lips, his body going slack against the tree. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sounds were the crackling of the still-burning forest and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Then Usopp, who'd been silent through the whole exchange, let out a shaky laugh. "Well," he said, "that's just great. Our captain's a celestial dragon. What's next, finding out I'm actually a giant?" "It doesn't matter," Chopper said fiercely. Luffy is Luffy. I don't care if his great-great-grandmother was a sea king. It does matter. Robin's voice was soft but firm. Not because it changes who he is, but because it changes how the world will see him. The moment this gets out, it won't get out, Zoro said flatly. We kill whoever comes looking. And then what? Nami demanded. We kill everyone who finds out after that, everyone who puts the pieces together. This isn't something we can fight our way out of. They were arguing around him, their voices getting louder and more desperate. But Luffy barely heard them. He was staring at one of the scattered photos, his mother, laughing at something outside the frame. She looked so young, so alive, so dead because of him. Luffy, Chopper's voice seemed to come from very far away. Luffy, what are you thinking? He looked up at his crew, his family, and saw the fear in their eyes, not of him, but for him. They'd follow him anywhere, he knew that, into hell itself if he asked, and that's exactly what he was afraid of. I need to go, he said quietly. What? Frankie stepped forward, his voice booming. Go where? Bro, we stick together, remember. Whatever this is, we face it as a crew, not this time. Luffy stood slowly, his legs still unsteady. This is about me, about what I am. And I won't let you get hurt because of something I can't control. That's not your choice to make. Nami's eyes were bright with unshed tears. We knew the risks when we joined this crew. We knew following you would be dangerous, but you didn't know you were following a celestial dragon. The words tasted like poison. You didn't know you were following the enemy. You're not the enemy, Robin said firmly. The system is the enemy. The ideology is the enemy, not the blood running through your veins. Tell that to the slaves in Sabayati. Luffy picked up one of the documents, his birth certificate, official and damning. Tell that to Fisher Tiger. To Boa Hancock, to everyone who's suffered because of what people like me have done. People like your blood relatives, Zoro corrected harshly, not people like you. There's a difference, and if you can't see it, you're dumber than I thought. But Luffy was already walking toward the Sunny's edge. The agent had said they had maybe an hour before the cleanup crew arrived, enough time to get his crew to safety. Enough time to disappear before anyone else got hurt. Captain, Frankie moved to block his path but stopped when he saw Luffy's expression. Oh hell, you're really gonna do this, aren't you? I have to. Luffy looked back at them one more time, at Chopper's worried face, at Nami's tears, at Zoro's barely controlled rage. At the family he was about to abandon for the second time in his life. I'm sorry. He launched himself off the ship before anyone could stop him, his rubber body stretching as he rocketed toward the forest. Behind him he heard Sanji cursing and Usopp shouting, but he didn't look back. He couldn't. In his pocket, the birth certificate crinkled as he ran. Monkey D. Luffy, it read, son of Monkey D. Dragon and Lady Saint Celestia. Born into privilege, born into power, born into everything he'd spent his life fighting against. Born wrong. The jungle swallowed him whole, and for the first time since Ace died, Luffy felt truly alone. But somewhere in the darkness between the trees, a new kind of dream was beginning to take shape. Not the nightmares of Marineford, but something different. Something that whispered of golden palaces and people kneeling, of power that could reshape the world. And in that whisper, Luffy heard his brother's voice one last time, live without regret. Maybe it was time to stop running from what he was and start deciding what he wanted to become. The cleanup crew would find an empty ship and a cold trail. But they wouldn't find Monkey D. Luffy. He had somewhere else to be. 3 days. 3 days since Luffy had fled from his crew, from the truth, from everything that made sense in his world. 3 days of wandering from island to island like a ghost, avoiding marine patrols, and trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with the knowledge burning a hole in his chest. He sat in a dingy tavern on some no-name island in the New World, staring at the bottom of his third cup of sake. The alcohol didn't help, his rubber body processed it too fast, but the ritual of drinking gave his hands something to do besides shake. The newspaper in front of him was 2 days old, but the headline still made his stomach churn. Straw Hat Pirates Vanish, Government Investigation Ongoing. There was a photo of the Thousand Sunny's empty deck, his Jolly Roger flapping in the wind like a surrender flag. They're safe, he told himself for the 100th time. That's what matters. Rough couple of days, Straw Hat. Luffy's head snapped up. The voice was smooth, cultured, with an underlying current of amusement that set his teeth on edge. A man slid into the seat across from him, tall, blonde, wearing a pink feathered coat that should have looked ridiculous but somehow didn't. Sunglasses hid his eyes, but Luffy could feel the weight of his stare. Do I know you? Luffy asked, though something about the man's smile was familiar in a way that made his skin crawl. Not yet, but I know you, cousin. The word hit Luffy like a physical blow. His hand shot out, grabbing the stranger's wrist in a grip that could crush steel. What did you just call me? The man's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Donquixote Doflamingo, your dear uncle Mjosgard's nephew. Which makes us family, doesn't it? Doflamingo. Luffy knew that name. One of the 7 warlords, ruler of Dressrosa, broker of weapons and dreams and nightmares, and now apparently family. You're lying, Luffy said, but his grip loosened. Fufu. Why would I lie about something so easily verified? Doflamingo gestured lazily, and suddenly the entire tavern went quiet. Not the normal quiet of people minding their own business, but the absolute silence of predators holding their breath. Besides, we have the same eyes, the same royal bearing. Luffy looked around the tavern and felt his stomach drop. Every patron, every bartender, every drunk slumped over their drinks. They were all staring at him with the same blank expression. Puppet strings, thin as spider silk, glinted in the lamplight. String fruit, Doflamingo said conversationally. Quite useful for private conversations. Don't worry, they won't remember this chat. I'm very good at making people forget things they shouldn't have heard. Let them go. Luffy's voice was deadly quiet. Of course, Doflamingo snapped his fingers and the strings vanished. The tavern's normal chatter resumed as if nothing had happened. I'm not here to fight you, Luffy. I'm here to offer you something much more valuable. Like what? Understanding. Doflamingo leaned back, casual as a cat in sunlight. Tell me, how does it feel to learn you're everything you thought you hated? The question hit like a punch to the gut. Luffy's hands clenched into fists on the table. I'm nothing like them. Nothing like you, aren't you? Doflamingo tilted his head, studying Luffy like a bug under glass. You command people without trying. You expect the world to bend to your will. You've built a crew of the strongest fighters in the world through nothing but pure charisma. Tell me, what's the difference between that and what the celestial dragons do? I don't own people, don't you? Doflamingo's voice dropped to a whisper. Your navigator, so desperate to save her village she'd steal from anyone. Your cook, bound by debt to a man who saved his life. Your swordsman, following you because you're the only person strong enough to help him achieve his dream. Tell me, Straw Hat, what's the difference between loyalty and slavery when the chains are invisible? Shut up. Luffy stood so fast his chair toppled over. Half the tavern looked their way, but Doflamingo just smiled. Did I strike a nerve? Good, that means you're starting to think. He stood as well, somehow making the simple motion look like a royal proclamation. Walk with me, cousin. Let me show you what our blood really means. Luffy wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at him to punch this man in his smug face and run, but where would he go? Back to his crew, who would look at him differently now. Back to the sea, pretending he wasn't carrying around a secret that could destroy everything he'd built, or forward into whatever fresh hell this pink-coated nightmare was offering. 1 hour, he said finally. Then I'm gone. Fufu. We'll see. Dressrosa at sunset was beautiful in the way poisonous flowers were beautiful, vibrant, alluring, and absolutely deadly if you got too close. Luffy walked beside Doflamingo through the crowded streets, watching people laugh and dance and live their lives in blissful ignorance. Street performers juggled fire, merchants hawked their wares, children ran between their parents' legs, shrieking with delight. It looked perfect, it looked happy, it looked wrong. You're frowning, Doflamingo observed. Not what you expected. Where are the Marines? Luffy asked. The world government flags. If you're a warlord, shouldn't there be government oversight? Fufu. Oh, there is. Just not where you can see it. Doflamingo waved at a group of children who waved back with bright smiles. The beauty of being both pirate and king is that you get to write your own rules. As long as I keep the people happy and the tribute flowing, the world government doesn't ask too many questions. They passed a fountain where teenagers were splashing each other, their laughter echoing off the cobblestones. An old man fed pigeons on a bench. A woman hung laundry from her balcony, humming an old sea shanty. Normal, peaceful. Exactly the kind of place Luffy would have loved to explore with his crew. So why did it feel like a stage set? You don't trust it, Doflamingo said, reading his expression. Good, trust is a luxury we can't afford. We, people like us. People born to rule. Doflamingo stopped walking, turning to face Luffy directly. Do you know what the difference is between a king and a tyrant? Kings don't murder innocent people. Fufu. Oh, sweet summer child. Kings murder plenty of innocent people. The difference is that kings make people thank them for it. He gestured toward the happy crowd around them. Every person in this city could leave tomorrow if they wanted. I'm not holding them prisoner. But they stay because I give them something more valuable than freedom. What? Purpose, direction, the comfort of knowing someone else is making the hard decisions. Doflamingo's smile turned sharp. Freedom is terrifying, Luffy. Most people would rather be happy slaves than free and miserable. That's not true, isn't it? Let me ask you something. When your crew looks at you, what do they see? Luffy frowned. I don't know. Their captain, their salvation, their hope, their reason for living. Doflamingo started walking again, his coat billowing behind him like wings. Roronoa Zoro was a bounty hunter going nowhere until you gave him a dream worth chasing. Cat burglar Nami was trapped by debt until you freed her village. Every single member of your crew was broken in some way until you showed them a different path. So you've been playing king your entire life without realizing it. The only difference between you and me is that I'm honest about what I am. They climbed a winding staircase carved into the side of a cliff, the city spreading out below them like a jeweled carpet. At the top sat a palace that looked like it had been carved from a single massive pink coral, its spires reaching toward the stars. Home sweet home, Doflamingo said. What do you think? Luffy stared at the palace and felt something twist in his chest. It was beautiful. More beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. And looking at it, he felt something he'd never felt before, a sense of recognition. Like some deep part of him had been waiting his whole life to see something like this, like he belonged here. He swallowed hard, it's nice. Nice, Doflamingo laughed, a sound like breaking glass. It's magnificent. It's a monument to power and vision and the will to reshape the world. And you know what the best part is? What? It could all be yours. Luffy turned to stare at him. What are you talking about? Think about it, cousin. You have celestial dragon blood, which gives you authority over the world government itself. You have conqueror's haki, which makes people naturally want to follow you. You have a crew of monsters who would die for you without question. Add it all up and what do you get? I get a headache. You get the potential to be the most powerful person in the world, not just Pirate King, that's thinking too small. I'm talking about real power. The power to change everything. Doflamingo's voice dropped to a whisper. The power to make sure no one else has to die like your brother did. The words hit Luffy like a physical blow. His knees nearly buckled. Don't, he said, his voice cracking. Don't you dare talk about Ace. Why not? His death is the reason you're here, isn't it? The reason you're finally ready to stop playing pirate and become something more. Doflamingo stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Fire Fist Ace died because he was too weak to protect himself, because he chose pride over pragmatism, because he thought being right was more important than being alive. He died protecting me. He died because the world government decided he should die, and he didn't have the power to say no. Doflamingo's smile was cruel and sharp. Tell me, Straw Hat, how many more people are you willing to let die while you cling to your childish ideals about freedom and adventure? Luffy's hands were shaking. Images flashed through his mind, Ace smiling as the magma tore through his chest. His crew's faces when they learned what he really was. The agent's dying words, they're coming. What are you offering? He heard himself ask. Knowledge, training. The tools to use your birthright properly. Doflamingo spread his arms wide, encompassing the palace and the city and the world beyond. I've spent 20 years learning how to be what we were born to be. Let me teach you. I'm not like you. Not yet, but you could be better. Doflamingo's voice turned soft, almost gentle. Stay for a week. Let me show you what's possible when someone with our blood stops apologizing for existing and starts embracing their destiny. Luffy looked out over Dressrosa again. From up here, the people looked like ants. Tiny, insignificant, completely dependent on the whims of giants they couldn't even see. Is that how I see my crew? The thought made him sick. 1 week, Doflamingo pressed. 7 days to learn what you really are. What's the worst that could happen? Everything, Luffy thought. Everything could happen. But Ace was dead. His crew was scattered. The world government wanted him eliminated. And somewhere out there, people were suffering because he wasn't strong enough to save them all. Maybe it was time to stop running from what he was and start figuring out how to use it. 1 week, he said finally. But I'm not promising anything. Doflamingo's grin was sharp enough to cut diamonds. Fufu. Oh, cousin, you're going to love what I have planned. As they walked toward the palace, Luffy felt the last of his old life slipping away like sand through his fingers. Somewhere behind him, invisible strings began to weave themselves around his heart. He told himself it was just for a week. He told himself he was still in control. He told himself a lot of things as the palace doors closed behind him with a sound like fate sealing shut. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, Luffy wondered if this was how it had always been meant to end. With him walking into the darkness, crown first. The first thing Luffy noticed about being treated like royalty was how exhausting it was. He'd been in Doflamingo's palace for exactly 12 hours, and already 3 different servants had tried to dress him, 2 had attempted to feed him, and one particularly brave maid had actually tried to bathe him. That last one had resulted in a very wet bathroom and a lot of apologetic bowing. "You're fighting it," Doflamingo observed, watching from the doorway as Luffy struggled with what appeared to be a solid gold fork. "The service, I can dress myself," Luffy muttered, giving up on the fancy utensils and just grabbing the meat with his hands. "And eat myself, and definitely bathe myself. Of course you can." "But that's not the point." Doflamingo settled into the chair across from him, his own breakfast untouched. "The point is that you shouldn't have to." The dining hall was ridiculous. That was the only word for it. The table could have seated 30 people. The ceiling was painted with cherubs and clouds, and every surface that wasn't covered in gold was covered in jewels. Luffy felt like he was eating inside a treasure box. "This is too much," he said, waving vaguely at the opulence around them. "For a pirate maybe, but you're not just a pirate anymore, are you?" Doflamingo's smile was sharp in the morning light. "You're a celestial dragon. This isn't excess, it's your birthright." Luffy's appetite disappeared. He pushed the plate away, suddenly remembering the way Hancock had flinched whenever someone mentioned the world nobles, the scars on her back that she hid even from him. "They're coming, you know," Doflamingo said conversationally. "Your crew, my sources say they've been hitting every information broker in the New World looking for you." Luffy's head snapped up. "Are they safe? For now. Though I have to admire their dedication. Roronoa Zoro apparently threatened to cut an entire marine base in half if they didn't provide information about your whereabouts." Doflamingo chuckled. "Your cook set fire to 3 taverns. Your navigator is bankrupting herself buying intel from every smuggler and pirate in the area. I need to contact them." "No," the word cracked like a whip. "You need to understand what you are before you go back to playing pirate. Otherwise, you'll just get them all killed." "I won't. You will." Doflamingo stood, his coat billowing behind him, "because you'll still be thinking like a commoner, like someone who has to follow the rules instead of making them. Come. I have something to show you." Despite every instinct screaming at him to refuse, Luffy followed. There was something about Doflamingo's voice when he got serious that bypassed rational thought and went straight to compliance. Like the man's words carried their own gravity. They walked through corridors lined with portraits, men and women in elaborate dress, all with the same cold, superior expressions. All with Luffy's eyes. "The Donquixote family tree," Doflamingo explained, noting his stare. 800 years of divine rule, broken only by one idealistic fool who thought love was more important than power. He stopped in front of a particular painting, a man who looked remarkably like an older version of Doflamingo, standing beside a woman and 2 small children. The family looked happy in a way that made Luffy's chest ache. "My father," Doflamingo said quietly, "Donquixote Homing, the man who gave up heaven for earth and got us all burned for it. What happened? He fell in love with the idea of living among humans. Convinced himself that celestial dragons could be just like everyone else if we only tried hard enough." Doflamingo's laugh was bitter. "So he renounced our status, gave up our palace in Mariejois, moved us to a regular house in the North Blue and told us we were going to live normal lives." Luffy waited, sensing there was more. "The humans he wanted so desperately to join tortured us for sport." Doflamingo's voice never changed, but something deadly crept into his posture. "Hung us from hooks, burned us with cigarettes, made us beg for scraps of food, all because we had been celestial dragons and they finally had a chance for revenge. That's horrible. That's reality. The gap between gods and mortals isn't something you can bridge with good intentions. My father learned that when they strung him up and left him to die slowly." Doflamingo turned away from the painting. "I learned it when I shot him myself to end his suffering." The casual admission of patricide should have shocked Luffy. Instead, he found himself thinking about what he might have done in the same situation. Would he have been strong enough to make that choice? "The point," Doflamingo continued, "is that there is no middle ground. You're either above them or beneath them, either predator or prey, either king or dead," Luffy finished quietly. "Exactly," Doflamingo's smile returned, sharp and pleased. "I knew you'd understand. You've seen what happens to people who try to change the world from the bottom up. How did that work out for your brother?" The words hit like a physical blow, but this time Luffy didn't flinch away from them. Instead, he let them sink in, let them fester. Ace had tried to be better than his bloodline, had tried to prove that the son of the Pirate King could be a good man, and where had it gotten him? A hole in his chest and a grave that Luffy still saw in his nightmares. "I want to show you something else," Doflamingo said. "Something that will help you understand the difference between what you were and what you could be." The underground auction house was exactly as disgusting as Luffy remembered from Sabaody. The same leering crowd of nobles and pirates. The same stage where human beings were displayed like merchandise. The same casual cruelty dressed up as entertainment. But this time, Luffy wasn't watching from the back of the room. This time he was sitting in a private box overlooking the stage, being served wine by nervous attendants who kept bowing so low their foreheads nearly touched the floor. Lot number 17, the auctioneer called out. A rare find, a mermaid from Fishman Island, guaranteed untrained. The curtain rose to reveal a young mermaid chained to a platform, her scales torn and bloody from obvious mistreatment. She couldn't have been more than 16, and the terror in her eyes made Luffy's stomach churn. Bidding starts at 50 million berries. The crowd erupted in excited chatter as hands shot up around the room. Luffy gripped the arms of his chair so hard the wood cracked. Easy, Doflamingo murmured. Remember why we're here. To watch people get sold like cattle, to understand power. Doflamingo leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, what do you see when you look at that stage? A kid who needs help. Look deeper. Luffy forced himself to really look. The mermaid was chained, yes, but the chains weren't what was keeping her there. It was the fear. The absolute certainty that resistance would only make things worse. The same expression he'd seen on the faces of slaves in Mariejois' eyes. She's already broken, he said quietly. Exactly. Not by the chains, but by the system that put them there. By the knowledge that no one is coming to save her, that this is just how the world works. Doflamingo gestured toward the bidding crowd. Now tell me what would happen if you stood up right now and told them to stop, Luffy frowned. They'd ignore me. Would they? You're a celestial dragon, cousin. Your word carries the weight of heaven itself. Doflamingo's smile was sharp. Try it? What? Stand up, use your voice, see what happens when a god speaks. Luffy hesitated. This felt like a trap, but he couldn't see the teeth yet. And that girl on the stage, he stood. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Every person in the auction house turned to look at him, their faces shifting from curiosity to recognition to absolute terror. The auctioneer's voice died mid-sentence. Bidders lowered their hands as if they'd been burned. Stop, Luffy said quietly. The word carried through the sudden silence like a death sentence. On the stage, the mermaid looked up at him with something that might have been hope. Release her, he continued, his voice gaining strength. Now, why yes, Lord Celestial Dragon, the auctioneer stumbled over his words, sweat pouring down his face. Of course, right away. Within minutes, the mermaid's chains were gone. Within 10, she was free to leave. The entire auction house sat in perfect silence, waiting for Luffy's permission to breathe. And the terrifying thing was how good it felt. The rush of absolute power, of having his words treated as divine commandments, was like nothing he'd ever experienced. For one intoxicating moment, he understood why celestial dragons acted the way they did. When the entire world bent to your will, why wouldn't you start to believe you were actually a god? Excellent, Doflamingo murmured as they left the auction house. How did that feel? Wrong, Luffy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Did it? You saved that girl's life with 2 words. How is that wrong? Because I only saved one. What about all the others? What about them? You can't save everyone, Luffy, but you can save the ones that matter to you. Doflamingo's voice turned persuasive. Imagine if you'd had that kind of authority at Marineford. 1 word from a celestial dragon and the execution would have stopped. Your brother would still be alive. The words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. Luffy stopped walking, his hands clenching into fists. Don't, he whispered. I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to open your eyes. Doflamingo placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture almost paternal. You have the power to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. But only if you stop pretending to be something you're not. They walked in silence back to the palace, but Luffy's mind was racing. He kept thinking about the mermaid's face when she realized she was free. About how easy it had been to make it happen. About all the times he'd fought and bled and nearly died to save people when he could have just spoken. There's going to be a celebration tonight, Doflamingo said as they reached the palace steps. The annual Dressrosa founding festival. The entire kingdom will be there, celebrating another year of peace and prosperity under my rule. Sounds nice. It will be. But more importantly, it will be educational. Doflamingo's smile was sharp. You'll get to see what real leadership looks like, how to make people love you for the chains you put on them. I don't want to chain anyone. Everyone is chained to something, cousin. The only question is whether you hold the keys. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Roronoa Zara was methodically destroying a marine outpost. Where is he? He snarled, his 3 swords gleaming in the afternoon sun. I told you we don't know. The Marine captain cowered behind an overturned desk. We haven't seen any sign of Straw Hat Luffy. Wrong answer. Zoro's next attack took out the entire west wall. Through the hole, he could see Sanji systematically burning his way through the motor pool while Frankie demolished the communications tower. They'd been at this for hours, and they were no closer to finding their captain than when they'd started. This is pointless, Nami said, her climatact sparking with barely contained lightning. He could be anywhere by now. He's not anywhere, Robin said quietly. He's somewhere specific, somewhere that makes sense for someone in his situation. She'd been thinking about it since they'd left the island. The revelation about Luffy's heritage had shocked them all, but Robin was a historian. She knew how to trace bloodlines, how to follow the threads of power and influence that bound the world together. The Donquixote family, she said suddenly. What? Chopper looked up from treating a wounded Marine. The celestial dragon who told Luffy's father about his true parentage. It had to be someone with access to the highest levels of government. Someone who knew about Dragon's infiltration mission, but also someone who cared enough about the child to save him instead of having him killed. So there's only one celestial dragon family with that kind of influence who might have a reason to protect Dragon's son. Robin's eyes were dark with realization. The Donquixotes, they fell from grace, but they were once among the most powerful families in Mariejois, and there's one member still alive who might remember the old loyalties. Doflamingo, Zoro said, his voice deadly quiet. It makes sense. If Luffy is looking for answers about his heritage, who better to ask than another fallen celestial dragon, someone who understands what it means to be caught between two worlds. Nami felt her blood turn to ice. We have to get to Dressrosa. Now. Agreed, Zoro said, already sheathing his swords. But we go in smart. If Doflamingo has Luffy, this isn't just a rescue mission. It's war. As they ran toward the Thousand Sunny, none of them noticed the small transponder snail hidden in Robin's coat pocket, or the way it had been faithfully transmitting their entire conversation to a certain pink-coated warlord who was very interested in their plans. Doflamingo smiled as he listened to their voices fade into static. His family reunion was about to get much more interesting. Back in Dressrosa, the festival was in full swing. Luffy stood on the palace balcony, watching thousands of people dance and laugh and celebrate in the streets below. They looked genuinely happy, which somehow made everything worse. Beautiful, isn't it? Doflamingo joined him at the railing. 10 years ago, this kingdom was dying. Civil war, economic collapse, people starving in the streets. Now look at it. What changed? I did. I gave them what they needed: stability, purpose, prosperity. And in return, they gave me their loyalty. Doflamingo's voice was soft, almost hypnotic. That's the secret, cousin. Don't rule through fear, rule through gratitude. Make them need you and they'll love you for it. A commotion in the square below caught Luffy's attention. A man was shouting something about corrupt officials, his voice cutting through the music and laughter. The crowd around him was growing uncomfortable, shuffling away from the disturbance. Ah, Doflamingo sighed. There's always one. Before Luffy could ask what he meant, Doflamingo raised his hand. Invisible strings shot out into the crowd, and suddenly the shouting man began moving differently. His arms jerked upward against his will. His head tilted at an unnatural angle. Stop, Luffy said sharply. He's disrupting the peace, spreading lies about my administration. Doflamingo's fingers twitched, and the man began to climb onto the fountain in the center of the square. Sometimes examples must be made. I said stop. The authority in Luffy's voice was unmistakable. Doflamingo's hand froze mid-motion, his strings going slack. Below them, the man stumbled as control of his body returned to him. For a long moment, the two celestial dragons stared at each other. Then Doflamingo smiled, slow and dangerous. Interesting, he murmured. It seems you've found your voice after all. That man wasn't hurting anyone. That man was questioning my authority. In front of my people, that cannot be allowed to stand. Doflamingo's strings began to move again, slower this time, but perhaps you'd prefer a more permanent solution. This time, the strings wrapped around the man's throat. No, Luffy's conqueror's haki exploded outward, shattering windows throughout the palace and dropping half the crowd in the square to their knees. The strings snapped like overstretched rubber bands. In the sudden silence that followed, Doflamingo began to laugh. Phew. Oh, that was magnificent. Do you see it now? Do you understand what you're capable of when you stop holding back? Luffy was breathing hard, his hands shaking from the release of power. Below them, people were picking themselves up off the ground, looking around in confusion and fear. I didn't mean to. Of course you did. You wanted that man to live, and your will made it so. That's what it means to be us, Luffy. Reality bends when we speak. Doflamingo's eyes glittered behind his sunglasses. The only question now is what you're going to do with that knowledge. As if summoned by his words, a servant appeared at the balcony doors. "Young master," he said, bowing low, "there's a ship approaching the harbor, the Thousand Sunny." Doflamingo's grin widened. "Perfect timing. It seems your crew has come to collect you, cousin. The question is, are you ready to be collected?" Luffy looked out over the city, at the people still picking themselves up from his unconscious display of power. At the man in the square who owed his life to Luffy's intervention. At the palace behind him, golden and beautiful and wrong in every possible way. His crew was coming. His family was coming to take him home. But for the first time since leaving them, Luffy wasn't sure he remembered what home felt like anymore. "Let them come," he said quietly. "It's time they learned the truth too." In the harbor below, the Thousand Sunny's Jolly Roger caught the wind, snapping proudly against the darkening sky. But for the first time in his life, looking at that skull and crossbones didn't make Luffy smile. Instead, it made him wonder if he'd already crossed a line he couldn't come back from. The Thousand Sunny sailed into Dressrosa's harbor like a ghost ship returning from the dead. Luffy watched from the palace balcony as his crew, his family, moved with the precision of a military operation. Frankie secured the ship while Zoro and Sanji took flanking positions on the dock. Robin deployed her powers to scout the immediate area, and Nami coordinated their movements with sharp, efficient gestures. They'd changed in the weeks since he'd left them. Harder, more focused. The easy camaraderie that had always defined the Straw Hat Pirates was replaced by something colder, more professional, more dangerous. "They look upset," Doflamingo observed, joining Luffy at the railing. "Can't imagine why. Because I left them." The words tasted like ash. "Because I ran away instead of trusting them with the truth. Or because they're finally seeing you for what you really are." Doflamingo's smile was sharp. "It's amazing how people change when they realize their god has feet of clay." Before Luffy could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the city. Not the gentle warning bells that announced visiting ships, but the harsh, desperate sound of a kingdom under attack. "What's happening?" Luffy demanded. Doflamingo was already moving, his coat billowing behind him as he strode toward the palace interior. Marines, 3 full battleships approaching from the north. Seems someone decided that harboring a fugitive celestial dragon might be worth a declaration of war. Luffy's blood turned to ice. "They're here because of me." "Of course they are. Did you think your little revelation would stay secret forever?" Doflamingo's laugh was bitter. "The moment that agent died, the cleanup began, and cleaning up includes anyone who might have given you sanctuary." They reached the command center, a room filled with transponder snails and tactical displays that wouldn't have looked out of place on a marine vessel. Doflamingo's officers were already coordinating the city's defenses, their voices crisp and professional. "Status report," Doflamingo snapped. 3 battleships full complement," his lieutenant replied. "Led by Vice Admiral Momonga, they're demanding you surrender the Celestial Dragon or face the consequences." "Consequences?" Doflamingo's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "I am a warlord of the sea. They can't just— They can if they think you're harboring a rogue world noble," another officer interrupted. "The 5 Elders' authority supersedes the warlord agreements." Through the massive windows, Luffy could see the marine ships taking positions around the harbor. Their cannons were already trained on the city, and he could make out the distinctive silhouettes of marine officers preparing for battle. His crew was trapped between the marines and the shore, caught in what was about to become a war zone. "I have to go to them," Luffy said, already moving toward the door. "Absolutely not." Doflamingo's strings shot out, wrapping around Luffy's wrists before he could dodge. "The moment you show yourself, they'll open fire. On you, on your crew, on anyone standing nearby." "Then what do you suggest?" "We fight, my kingdom, my rules." Doflamingo's strings tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to make his point. "But if we're going to do this, we do it properly. No more playing pirate, cousin. It's time to be what you were born to be." The first cannon blast shook the palace to its foundations. The harbor erupted into chaos as marine artillery rained down on the docks. Luffy watched in horror as buildings collapsed and civilians ran screaming through the streets. Somewhere in that inferno, his crew was fighting for their lives. "Doflamingo," a voice boomed across the water, amplified by Den mushy speakers. "By order of the world government, surrender the rogue celestial dragon or face annihilation." "Rogue," Doflamingo's laugh carried across the harbor as he stepped onto his own balcony, arms spread wide. "I prefer prodigal son." Another barrage of cannon fire was his answer. This time, Luffy could see return fire from the Thousand Sunny Frankie's weapons systems lighting up the twilight as he fought to keep the Marines at bay. "They're going to die," Luffy whispered, watching tracer rounds streak across the harbor. "My crew is going to die because of me." "Yes," Doflamingo said simply, "unless you do something about it." "What can I do?" "I'm one person." "No, you're not." Doflamingo turned to face him, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was completely serious. "You're a celestial dragon. You have authority that supersedes every marine in that fleet, including their admiral. The question is whether you're brave enough to use it." Luffy stared at him. "You want me to order them to stop. I want you to save your family." Doflamingo's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Isn't that what you've always done? Save the people you love, no matter the cost." Another explosion rocked the harbor. Through the smoke, Luffy could see the Sunny listing to starboard, her hull breached in at least 3 places. Nami was at the wheel, trying to maneuver them out of the kill zone, while Zoro and Sanji fought desperately to keep the Marines from boarding. They were losing. "How?" Luffy's voice cracked. "How do I make them stop? The same way you stopped that auction house, with your voice, with your authority." Doflamingo moved to stand beside him, his presence oddly comforting. "But this time, you can't hesitate. This time, you have to mean it." Luffy closed his eyes, thinking of Ace's final smile, of Robin's gentle understanding, of Chopper's unwavering faith, of all the people who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. When he opened them again, something fundamental had shifted. "Get me a den mushy," he said quietly, "ship-to-ship frequency." The snail appeared in his hands as if by magic, its eyes focusing on him with mechanical precision. When Luffy spoke, his voice carried across the harbor with the weight of 800 years of divine authority. "This is Saint Monkey D. Luffy," he said, the title feeling like poison on his tongue. "By divine right and celestial privilege, I command you to cease fire immediately." The effect was instantaneous. Every gun in the Marine fleet fell silent. The harbor, which moments before had been a hellscape of smoke and fire, suddenly became as quiet as a graveyard. "That's impossible," came a voice over the den mushy Vice Admiral Mamanga, his tone sharp with disbelief. "Monkey D. Luffy is a pirate, not a—" "I am the son of Saint Rossward's daughter, Lady Celestia," Luffy interrupted, each word feeling like a nail in his own coffin. "My bloodline has been verified by Cipher Pol archives. My authority is absolute. Stand down immediately or face charges of treason against the world government." The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, "Requesting verification from Mariejois." "Denied." Luffy's voice grew harder, more commanding. "I am a celestial dragon. I do not require verification from anyone. Stand down or I will have you all executed for insubordination." The threat was empty. Luffy would never actually hurt them, but they didn't know that. All they knew was that a voice carrying undeniable authority was giving them orders that could get them court-martialed if they disobeyed. "Fleet withdrawing," Mamanga said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "This matter will be reported to the 5 elders." "See that it is," Luffy replied coldly. "And Admiral, the next time you threaten my kingdom, I won't be so merciful." The Marine ships began their retreat, their massive hulls turning away from Dressrosa's harbor like beaten dogs. In the sudden quiet that followed, Luffy could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. 3 words, "I am Saint," and an entire Marine fleet had backed down. The power was intoxicating and terrifying. "Magnificent," Doflamingo breathed. "Absolutely magnificent. Do you see now? Do you understand what you're capable of?" Luffy couldn't answer. He was staring at the Thousand Sunny, at his crew gathered on the deck staring up at the palace. Even from this distance, he could see the shock on their faces. They'd heard every word, they knew what he'd become. "Young master," one of Doflamingo's officers approached cautiously. "The Straw Hat Pirates are requesting permission to come ashore." "Granted," Doflamingo said without looking away from Luffy. "Have them escorted to the throne room. It's time for a proper family reunion." The throne room was exactly what Luffy had expected from Doflamingo: excessive, intimidating, and designed to make visitors feel small. Golden pillars stretched toward a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of conquest. The throne itself was carved from a single massive piece of coral, its surface inlaid with jewels that caught the light like stars. Luffy sat in a smaller chair beside it, feeling ridiculous in the formal clothes Doflamingo had insisted he wear. The golden circlet on his head weighed approximately nothing and felt heavier than a mountain. When his crew entered, the silence was deafening. They looked older, tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from weeks of desperate searching and constant fighting, but they were alive and that was all that mattered. Nami was the first to speak. Is it true? Her voice was barely above a whisper. What you said to the Marines, are you really a celestial dragon? Luffy met her eyes, seeing the pain there. Yeah, I am. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Chopper made a small, wounded sound. Usopp took a step backward. Even Robin, who'd known the truth longest, looked shaken to hear him say it out loud. How long have you known? Zoro's voice was deadly quiet. Since the day I left you. A dying Cipher Pol agent told me everything. Luffy's hands clenched in his lap. I'm the son of Dragon and a world noble named Lady Celestia. Garp hid me to protect me from being executed as a political inconvenience. And you didn't think to tell us. Sanji's usual composure was cracking. You didn't think we deserved to know. I was protecting you. From what? Nami demanded, tears streaming down her face. From the truth, from who you really are. From this. Luffy gestured wildly at the throne room, at the golden circlet on his head, at the power that had just saved their lives. From watching me become something I hate. But you haven't become anything, Chopper said desperately. You're still Luffy, you're still our captain. Am I? Luffy's laugh was bitter. Did your captain just threaten to execute a marine fleet? Did your captain just claim divine authority over human lives? You saved us, Robin said quietly. Whatever your reasons, whatever it cost you, you saved our lives. At what price? Luffy stood, the circlet catching the light as he moved. I used my celestial dragon blood to make them back down. I became the very thing we've spent years fighting against. You became what you needed to become to protect your family, Doflamingo interjected smoothly. There's no shame in that. Stay out of this, Zoro snarled, his hand moving to his swords. I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, Luffy is my guest, my student. Your prisoner, Frankie interrupted, his voice booming through the throne room. Don't try to dress it up, Flamingo. We know manipulation when we see it. Doflamingo's smile turned predatory. Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're the ones who abandoned him, left him alone with a secret that was eating him alive from the inside out. We didn't abandon anyone, Nami shouted. He left us. He ran away instead of trusting us, because he knew you'd look at him exactly the way you're looking at him now, Doflamingo replied calmly. Like he's become a monster. The words hit home. Luffy could see it in their faces, the fear, the uncertainty, the horrible realization that the person they'd followed to the ends of the earth might not be who they thought he was. I never wanted this, Luffy said quietly. I never wanted to be like them. But look what happened the moment I stopped pretending. I saved your lives with 2 sentences. How many times have we fought and bled and nearly died trying to save people when I could have just spoken? Because speaking like that means accepting what you are, Robin said, her voice heavy with understanding. And once you accept it, once you start using that power regularly, you become them, Luffy finished. You become everything we swore to fight against. Or, Doflamingo said softly, you become something better, someone who can change the world from the inside instead of just raging against it from the outside. The way you changed Dressrosa, Zoro's voice dripped with sarcasm. Look around you, swordsman. Do you see suffering? Do you see oppression? My people are happy, prosperous, safe. They love me because I give them everything they need. Doflamingo's smile was sharp. Can you say the same about the places you've liberated? The accusation stung because it had teeth. How many islands had they left behind, trusting that their brief intervention would be enough to create lasting change? How many people had they saved only to abandon them to their fate once the adventure was over? It's different, Chopper said desperately. We help people because it's right, not because we want them to worship us. The result is the same, Doflamingo replied. Temporary salvation followed by inevitable return to the status quo, unless someone with real power decides to make permanent changes. Power corrupts, Nami said firmly. We've seen it happen over and over again. Power reveals, Doflamingo corrected. It doesn't change who you are, it shows who you've always been underneath. His eyes found Luffy's. The question is, who are you, cousin? The idealistic pirate who thinks freedom means doing whatever you want? Or the king who understands that true freedom requires someone to make the hard choices? Luffy looked at his crew, his family, and saw the same question reflected in their eyes. Who was he, really? The boy who dreamed of adventure and treasure, or the man who just threatened to execute Marines to protect the people he loved? I don't know, he admitted finally. I don't know who I am anymore. The honesty seemed to break something in the room. Nami started crying harder. Chopper took a tentative step forward, his small hoof reaching out as if to comfort his captain. Even Zoro's expression softened slightly. Then figure it out, Sanji said quietly, but figure it out with us, not with him. He jerked his head toward Doflamingo. Whatever you are, whatever you were born to be, you're still our captain. That has to count for something. Before Luffy could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. I'm afraid that's no longer possible. Everyone turned toward the throne room entrance, where a figure in a white suit and mask stood waiting. Cipher Pol, but higher ranking than any agent Luffy had seen before. The kind of operative who answered directly to the five elders. CP0, Robin breathed, her face going pale. Saint Monkey D. Luffy, the agent said formally, by order of the Celestial Dragons and the five elders, you are summoned to Mariejois immediately. Your presence is required for debriefing. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the room knew what Celestial Dragon debriefings entailed. I'm not going anywhere, Luffy said firmly. I'm afraid that's not a request. The agent's voice never changed, but something deadly entered his posture. You will come voluntarily, or you will come unconscious, your choice. Like hell, Zoro's swords cleared their sheaths in a blur of steel. Nobody's taking our captain anywhere. Stand down, the agent said calmly. This is Celestial Dragon business. Your interference will be considered an act of treason against the world government. Let them try, Sanji's leg burst into flames. We've fought the government before. Not like this, Doflamingo said quietly. Not when they have legal authority to execute you all as enemies of heaven itself. The agent nodded approvingly. The warlord understands the situation. St. Luffy's bloodline gives him certain privileges, but it also comes with certain obligations. The five elders are very interested in discussing his recent behavior. Luffy felt the walls closing in around him. If he went with the agent, he'd disappear into the heart of the world government, probably forever. If he refused, his crew would be branded as traitors and hunted to the ends of the earth. Unless, I'll go, he said quietly. But not alone, the agent tilted his head. Explain. Doflamingo comes with me, as my advisor. As a fellow Celestial Dragon, he has the right to witness any proceedings involving my status. Luffy met the agent's masked gaze steadily. And my crew accompanies us as my retinue. Celestial Dragons don't travel without proper escort. It was a desperate gambit, but it was the only play he had. If he was going to embrace his heritage, he might as well use it to protect his family. The agent considered this for a long moment. Then, acceptable, you depart within the hour. As the agent left to make arrangements, Luffy felt the full weight of what he'd just agreed to settle on his shoulders. He was going to Mariejois, to the heart of everything he'd spent his life fighting against, and he was going as one of them. Well, Doflamingo said, his smile returning full force. It seems your education is about to enter its next phase, cousin. I do hope you're ready for what comes next. Luffy looked at his crew, at the fear and determination warring in their faces, and realized he'd just made a choice that would change all of their lives forever. The crown wasn't just fitting anymore, it was becoming part of him. Mariejois was a monument to everything wrong with the world. Luffy had seen it before, of course glimpses from newspaper photos and wanted posters, distant views from ships passing far below. But seeing it up close, walking through its pristine white corridors with his crew trailing behind him like exotic pets, was an entirely different kind of nightmare. Everything gleamed. The marble floors reflected their footsteps back at them in perfect clarity. The walls were adorned with art that cost more than most kingdoms' annual budgets. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts, their eyes carefully averted from the passing nobles, and Luffy noticed that every single one of them wore the same small brand on their forehead. The mark of the dragon's hoof, the sign of Celestial Dragon ownership. First time back home? Doflamingo asked conversationally, apparently unbothered by the opulence surrounding them. This isn't my home, Luffy said through gritted teeth. Isn't it? You were conceived here. Your mother lived here for 18 years before she met your father. Your bloodline built these halls. Doflamingo's smile was sharp. Whether you like it or not, cousin, this is where you come from. Behind them, Luffy could hear his crew's uncomfortable silence. Nami was trying not to stare at the casual displays of wealth. Robin was cataloging every detail with her historian's eye. Zoro looked like he was planning the most efficient way to burn the entire place down. They'd been traveling for 3 days, and the tension hadn't gotten any easier. His crew was trying to act normal, but Luffy could feel the distance growing between them. They looked at him differently now, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of careful uncertainty that hurt worse than outright rejection. Saint Doflamingo. The voice belonged to a CP0 agent, though this one wore more elaborate robes than usual. The 5 elders are waiting in the Chamber of Authority, there, eager to meet our prodigal prince. I'm sure they are, Doflamingo replied smoothly. Tell them we'll be along shortly. The young saint needs a moment to acclimate. The agent bowed and disappeared, leaving them alone in the corridor. Well, alone except for the dozen other agents shadowing their every move. Nervous? Doflamingo asked. Should I be? Probably. The five elders don't summon people lightly, and they're particularly interested in family members who have been playing pirate for the better part of 2 decades. Doflamingo's voice dropped. They're going to want to know where your loyalties lie. My loyalties are with my crew. Are they? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your loyalties are getting complicated. Doflamingo gestured toward a massive portrait hanging on the wall, a family scene depicting a dozen celestial dragons in their elaborate robes. Tell me, when you used your authority to stop those Marines, what did you feel? Luffy didn't answer, but he didn't need to. They both knew what he'd felt in that moment of absolute power. The intoxicating rush of having his word treated as divine law, the terrible satisfaction of knowing he could bend the world to his will with nothing but his voice. The blood remembers, Doflamingo said softly, even when the mind rebels against it. Before Luffy could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor. A group of celestial dragons approached, their bubble helmets gleaming in the artificial light. Luffy recognized some of them from wanted posters and newspaper photos, St. Charlos, St. Rosward, others whose names he'd never bothered to learn. His extended family. So this is the little bastard, St. Charlos said, his voice muffled by his breathing apparatus. Doesn't look like much. Careful, Charlos, St. Rosward warned. He may be a mongrel, but he's still one of us. The five elders have made that quite clear. One of us, another dragon, St. Sharia laughed mockingly. Look at him. No breathing apparatus, no proper robes, surrounded by common pirates. He's barely human, let alone divine. The insults rolled off Luffy like water, but he could feel his crew's anger building behind him. Sanji's hands were clenched into fists. Zoro's grip on his swords had tightened. One wrong word and this corridor would become a bloodbath. Actually, Doflamingo interjected smoothly, I think you'll find that St. Luffy's unique upbringing has given him certain advantages. For instance, he can actually survive breathing the same air as commoners. Quite useful, really. The gathered dragons recoiled as if he'd suggested something obscene. In their world, the very idea of breathing unfiltered air was tantamount to suicide. Disgusting, St. Charlos muttered. No wonder he turned out wrong. Wrong, Luffy spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same quiet authority he'd used with the Marines. What exactly is wrong about me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The other dragons shifted uncomfortably, suddenly remembering that, bloodline or not, this bastard had commanded a marine fleet to stand down just days earlier. Nothing at all, St. Rosward said quickly. Charlos misspoke. We're all delighted to welcome you home. The lie was obvious, but Luffy let it pass. These people weren't worth his anger. They were parasites, living off the suffering of others while contributing nothing to the world. Pathetic rather than threatening. But they were also his blood family, and that thought made his stomach churn. The five elders are waiting, he said simply. Let's get this over with. The Chamber of Authority was exactly what Luffy had expected, a massive room dominated by a circular table where 5 old men sat in judgment of the world. The 5 elders themselves were legendary figures, their names whispered in fear across all 4 seas. And they were all staring at him with expressions that mixed curiosity, calculation, and barely concealed hostility. Saint Monkey D. Luffy, the bearded elder, spoke first. Or do you prefer Straw Hat? We've heard so much about your adventures. Luffy is fine, he replied, refusing to be intimidated by their presence. How refreshingly common. The blonde elder's smile was razor-thin. Tell us, young saint, what do you know about your heritage? I know I'm the son of a celestial dragon and a revolutionary. I know my mother was executed for the crime of falling in love. I know I was hidden away to prevent a political scandal. Luffy met each of their gazes in turn. What I don't know is why you're pretending to care now. Because, the elder with the mustache said coldly, your recent activities have created complications. A celestial dragon operating as a pirate reflects poorly on our divine authority. Good. The simple response sent a ripple of shock through the chamber. Behind him, Luffy heard Nami's sharp intake of breath. Excuse me, the bald elder leaned forward. I said good. If my existence embarrasses you, then I'm doing something right. Luffy crossed his arms. You want to know where my loyalties lie? They're with the people you've spent centuries oppressing. They're with everyone who's suffered under your divine authority. If that makes me a problem, then we understand each other perfectly. How dare you? St. Charlos started to sputter. Enough, the final elder, the one with the sword, spoke for the first time. Saint Luffy, you seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter. Allow me to clarify, you are a celestial dragon. That comes with certain privileges, yes, but also with certain obligations. You will fulfill those obligations or you will be dealt with accordingly. Meaning your crew dies. The threat was delivered with casual indifference. Your friends, your allies, everyone who has ever helped you, they all become enemies of the world government, hunted to extinction. Luffy felt his anger spike, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. That seems unnecessarily harsh. Everyone turned toward the chamber's entrance, where an older celestial dragon stood waiting. Unlike the others, he wasn't wearing a breathing apparatus, and his robes were simpler, still elaborate by normal standards, but subdued compared to the usual celestial dragon excess. Mjosgard, Saint Rosward said coldly, "This doesn't concern you, doesn't it?" The newcomer, Saint Mjosgard, stepped into the chamber. "This young man is my nephew, my family. I think that gives me some say in his fate." Luffy stared at him, recognition dawning slowly. This was the man who had saved him as an infant, who had made the choice to preserve his life instead of ending it. His biological grandfather. "You," he said quietly. "Hello, Luffy." Mjosgard's smile was sad. "You look just like your mother." The words hit like a physical blow. Luffy had seen photos of his mother, but hearing it from someone who had actually known her was different, more real. "You knew her. I raised her. Celestia she was the light of my life. The daughter I never had." Mjosgard's voice grew heavy with old grief, "which is why losing her nearly destroyed me." "You lost her because you told the 5 elders about the pregnancy," Saint Rosward said accusingly. "If you kept your mouth shut, she would have died anyway and the child with her. At least this way, something of her survived." Mjosgard's eyes never left Luffy's face. "I've spent 18 years wondering if I made the right choice. Looking at you now, I think I did. She's dead because of me," Luffy said, the words scraping his throat raw, "because I existed." "She's dead because they killed her," Mjosgard corrected firmly. "Because they couldn't tolerate the idea that one of their own might choose love over power. Her death is on their hands, not yours." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. The 5 elders shifted uncomfortably, but none of them denied it. "Water under the bridge," the bearded elder said dismissively. "The question now is what to do with her son." "I propose we give him a choice," Mjosgard said. "Full restoration to his rightful place among the celestial dragons with all the privileges that entails. Or we let him walk away, renounce his birthright, give up any claim to celestial dragon status and return to his life as a pirate, clean slate." "Absolutely not," the blonde elder snapped. "A celestial dragon cannot simply renounce their heritage. The bloodline is sacred." "The bloodline is whatever we say it is," Mjosgard replied calmly. "We've disowned family members before. We can do it again." "And if he chooses to walk away?" the mustached elder asked. "What's to stop him from telling the world about his heritage, from using it for political gain?" "His word," Mjosgard said simply. "The word of a man who has spent his entire life protecting his friends." All eyes turned to Luffy. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Stay and become everything he'd always hated, but keep his crew safe. Or leave and maintain his principles, but risk their lives every day for the rest of their lives. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You have until tomorrow," the sword-bearing elder said coldly. "The reverie begins then, and we need to know where you stand before the other kings arrive." "The reverie," Robin spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. "That's not scheduled for another 6 months. Emergency session," the bald elder explained. "Recent events have made it necessary to clarify certain political situations." Something in his tone set off alarm bells in Luffy's head. "What recent events?" "Revolutionary activity has increased dramatically in the past month," the bearded elder said. "Someone has been coordinating attacks on world government facilities across all 4 seas. Whoever it is, they're well-informed, well-funded, and extremely dangerous." "Dragon," Luffy breathed. "Among others, it seems your father has finally decided to move from isolated incidents to open warfare." The blonde elder's smile was predatory. "Which is why your timing is so fortuitous. Having a reformed celestial dragon publicly denounce the revolutionary army would send a powerful message." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't about Luffy at all. It was about using him as a weapon against his own father. A propaganda victory that would demoralize the revolutionaries and legitimize the world government's inevitable crackdown. "You want me to betray him," Luffy said. We want you to choose a side, the Sword Elder corrected. Your father's failed revolution or your family's eternal authority. Some choice. All choices have consequences, Mjosgard said quietly. The question is which consequences you can live with. Before Luffy could respond, a commotion erupted outside the chamber. Shouting voices, running footsteps, the distinctive crack of gunfire. Through the massive windows, smoke was rising from somewhere in the lower districts of Mariejois. What now? The mustached elder demanded. A CP0 agent burst through the chamber doors, his usual composure completely shattered. Sirs, we're under attack. Revolutionary forces have breached the outer defenses. Impossible, the bald elder snapped. Mariejois is impregnable. Not anymore, the agent replied grimly. They had inside information. Knew exactly where to strike, and sir, they're being led by Monkey D. Dragon himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Luffy felt his world tilt sideways as the implications sank in. His father was here, in Mariejois, leading an assault on the seat of world government power, and Luffy was sitting in the middle of it, wearing clothes that marked him as the enemy. Well, Doflamingo said into the silence, his smile sharp as broken glass. This just got interesting. Through the windows, more explosions lit up the night sky. In the distance, Luffy could see figures moving through the smoke, revolutionaries, fighting their way toward the very heart of celestial dragon power. Toward him, the choice he'd been given suddenly seemed a lot more complicated. The attack on Mariejois wasn't subtle. Revolutionary forces swarmed through the lower districts like a tide of righteous fury, their battle cries echoing off the pristine white walls. From the Chamber of Authority's windows, Luffy watched explosions bloom across the Holy Land like deadly flowers, each one bringing the rebels closer to the center of celestial dragon power. Evacuation protocols are in effect, a CP0 agent reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. All celestial dragons are being moved to secure locations. What about the slaves? Mjosgard asked quietly. The agent's pause was telling. Sir, the servants, the workers, the people who can't just teleport to safety whenever there's trouble. Mjosgard's voice hardened. What about them? They're not part of the evacuation plan, sir. Of course they're not. The disgust in Mjosgard's voice was clear. After all, they're just property, right? Replaceable. Uncle, St. Rosward warned, now is not the time for your bleeding heart nonsense. Isn't it? Mjosgard stood, his simple robes a stark contrast to the ornate chamber around him. When exactly is the right time to care about human lives? Before anyone could answer, the chamber's massive doors exploded inward. The blast sent everyone diving for cover except Luffy, who remained standing as smoke and debris filled the air. Through the haze, figures emerged, revolutionaries in their distinctive green coats, their weapons trained on the most powerful people in the world. And leading them was a man Luffy had only seen in wanted posters and nightmares. Monkey D. Dragon looked exactly like what he was, a force of nature barely contained in human form. His presence filled the chamber like a storm front, making the air itself feel heavy and charged. The tattoo on his face seemed to shift in the flickering light from the fires outside. 5 elders, Dragon said, his voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of revolutionary fury. Your time is over. Dragon, the sword-bearing elder was on his feet, his blade already drawn. How dare you defile this sacred place? Sacred, Dragon's laugh was bitter. This place is built on 8 centuries of slavery, murder, and oppression. The only thing sacred here is the ground underneath it, and that's only because it's finally going to be watered with the blood of tyrants. His eyes swept the chamber, taking in the cowering celestial dragons, the defiant elders, Doflamingo's amused expression. And then they found Luffy. The world went very, very quiet. Father and son stared at each other across the length of the chamber. 2 decades of separation collapsed into a single moment. Dragon's expression cycled through shock, recognition, and something that might have been hope before settling into grim determination. Luffy, he said quietly, what are you doing here? Learning, Luffy replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. About myself, about what I am. What you are, Dragon said, taking a step closer, is my son, nothing more, nothing less. Actually, Doflamingo interjected smoothly, he's quite a bit more than that, haven't you heard? St. Luffy has recently embraced his celestial dragon heritage. Quite the character development, really. Dragon's eyes never left Luffy's face, but something dangerous entered his expression. Is that true? It's complicated. No, Dragon said firmly. It's not. Either you stand with the oppressors or you stand with the oppressed. There is no middle ground in this war. Maybe that's the problem, Luffy shot back. Maybe thinking in absolutes is why this war has been going on for centuries without accomplishing anything. The words hit Dragon like a physical blow. Behind him, his revolutionaries shifted uncomfortably, questioning their leader's methods was not something that happened often in their organization. Accomplishing anything, Dragon's voice rose. We've freed thousands of slaves, overthrown dozens of corrupt kingdoms, shown the world that the celestial dragons aren't untouchable gods. And yet here they are, Luffy gestured around the chamber, still in power. Still oppressing people, still treating human lives like property. He took a step toward his father. How many people have died in your revolution, Dragon? How many more are going to die before you admit that violence isn't the answer? Violence is the only language they understand. Dragon's composure was cracking, revealing the passionate revolutionary underneath. Do you think they'll give up their power voluntarily? Do you think they'll suddenly develop consciences after 8 centuries of brutality? I think, Luffy said quietly, that treating them like monsters makes it easier for them to act like monsters. They are monsters, Dragon's haki flared, making the windows rattle. They buy and sell human beings like livestock. They burn entire islands for entertainment. They raised me, St. Mjosgard interrupted quietly. Some of them anyway. Dragon whirled to face the older celestial dragon, his expression murderous. You're the one who saved him, who convinced Garp to hide him instead of letting me raise him properly. I saved him from becoming like you, Mjosgard replied without flinching. A man so consumed by hatred that he's forgotten what he's supposed to be fighting for. I'm fighting for freedom, you're fighting for revenge, there's a difference. Mjosgard moved to stand beside Luffy, and the family resemblance was suddenly obvious. Celestia understood that. It's why she fell in love with you in the first place. She saw past the anger to the man underneath. But somewhere along the way, you let the anger consume that man. Don't. Dragon's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare talk about her, you killed her. We all killed her, Mjosgard said sadly. You, me, the system that made our love impossible, but at least I tried to save something from the wreckage. By turning my son into one of them, by giving him a choice, Luffy said, finding his voice again. Something you never did. Dragon turned back to face him, and for the first time, Luffy saw vulnerability in his father's eyes. What are you talking about? You decided I was going to be a revolutionary before I was even born. You made plans for my life without asking what I wanted. Sound familiar? Luffy's voice grew harder. How is that different from what the celestial dragons do? Because I was trying to save the world. So are they. The words came out harsher than Luffy intended. Every tyrant in history thought they were saving the world from something. The only difference is what they were saving it from. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around the chamber, revolutionaries and celestial dragons alike watched the confrontation with growing unease. This wasn't how anyone had expected the meeting to go. I am nothing like them, Dragon said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? Luffy stepped closer, close enough to see the pain in his father's eyes. You topple governments without asking the people if they want to be toppled. You start wars in the name of peace. You sacrifice individual lives for the greater good. Tell me, Dragon, how is that different from what the world government does? Because we're fighting for the right cause. According to who? You? Luffy's laugh was bitter. The celestial dragons think they're fighting for the right cause too. They think they're maintaining order, preventing chaos, keeping the world stable. Everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story. Dragon's hands were shaking now, though whether from rage or anguish, Luffy couldn't tell. So what are you saying? That there's no difference between good and evil? That we should just accept injustice because fighting it makes us just as bad? I'm saying maybe the problem isn't who's in charge. Maybe the problem is thinking anyone should have that much power over other people's lives. The words seemed to physically stagger Dragon. Behind him, his revolutionaries were exchanging worried glances. Their leader's absolute certainty was cracking, and they could all see it. You don't understand, Dragon whispered. You don't know what they've done. What they're capable of. I know what you're capable of, Luffy replied quietly. I've seen the islands you've burned, the kingdoms you've destroyed, the people who have died because they were on the wrong side of your revolution. That's war, that's murder. Just like what they do is murder. Luffy gestured toward the 5 elders. The only difference is the justification. For a moment, Dragon looked like he might collapse. The weight of decades of violence, of choices made in the name of the greater good, seemed to settle on his shoulders all at once. Then his expression hardened again. You're wrong, he said flatly, and you're naive. But you're still my son, and I won't let them corrupt you any further. He gestured to his revolutionaries. Take him, we're leaving. No, Luffy said simply. That wasn't a request. And that wasn't a suggestion. Luffy's conqueror's haki flared, not enough to knock anyone out, but enough to make his point. I'm not going anywhere with you. Dragon's eyes widened. In all his planning, in all his scenarios for this meeting, he'd never considered the possibility that his son would refuse him. Luffy, he said desperately, they'll destroy you. They'll turn you into everything you hate. Maybe, or maybe I'll turn them into something better. Luffy looked around the chamber, at the terrified celestial dragons, the defiant revolutionaries, the calculating 5 elders. Maybe instead of burning it all down or keeping it exactly the same, we try something different. Like what? I don't know yet, but I know it won't involve mass murder or systematic oppression. Luffy's voice grew stronger. And I know it won't involve forcing people to choose between being victims or monsters. That's not how the world works. Then maybe it's time to change how the world works. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then Dragon's composure shattered completely. Enough! His haki exploded outward with the force of a hurricane, shattering windows and sending everyone except Luffy staggering backward. I came here to save you, not to listen to naive philosophy. And I'm telling you I don't need saving. Luffy's own haki rose to meet his father's, the two forces clashing in the middle of the chamber like invisible titans. Not from them and not from you. The collision of wills was magnificent and terrifying. The very air seemed to split apart as father and son faced off, their conquerors haki battling for dominance. Revolutionary and celestial dragon alike dropped to their knees under the pressure. But something was wrong. Luffy could feel it building in his chest, growing stronger with every heartbeat. This wasn't just conqueror's haki, this was something else. Something new, something dangerous. Stop, he gasped, trying to pull back his power. Something's wrong, but it was too late. The energy building inside him had reached critical mass, and when it exploded outward, it carried with it the force of absolute authority. Everyone stopped fighting. The command hit every person in the chamber like a physical blow. Revolutionary and celestial dragon, elder and pirate, all of them froze in place, their bodies responding to an authority that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the most primitive parts of their brains. Even Dragon stopped mid-attack, his fist inches from one of the 5 elders' faces. In the sudden, absolute silence that followed, Luffy realized what he'd just done. He'd used his conqueror's haki not just to intimidate or overwhelm, but to command. To force his will upon others in a way that left them no choice but to obey. He'd done exactly what every celestial dragon before him had done, imposed his authority through divine right. And the most terrifying part was how natural it had felt. My God, Doflamingo breathed, his voice filled with something like awe. Do you see what you just did? Luffy looked around the chamber at the frozen figures, at his crew staring at him with expressions mixing fear and wonder, at his father's face twisted with shock and something that might have been pride. His voice cracked. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did, Dragon said quietly, his body slowly returning to his control. That wasn't an accident, son. That was you choosing to use the power you were born with. To stop a fight, Luffy said desperately. To keep people from getting hurt. The road to tyranny is paved with good intentions, Dragon replied, but his voice lacked its earlier anger. The question is, what are you going to do now? Luffy looked around the chamber again, at the revolutionaries who'd come to rescue him, at the celestial dragons who saw him as either a tool or a threat, at his crew who didn't know what to think of him anymore. At his father who'd spent decades fighting a war that would never truly end. I'm going to try something different, he said finally. Something that doesn't involve anyone forcing their will on anyone else. And if that doesn't work, Luffy met his father's eyes, seeing his own determination reflected there. Then at least I'll know I tried. Dragon stared at him for a long moment, then slowly he began to smile. You really are your mother's son, he said quietly. She always believed people could change. Even when I'd given up hope. Did she change you? Dragon's smile turned sad. For a while, but then she died and I let the anger take over again. He looked around the chamber at the frozen tableau of his life's work. Maybe it's time I tried a different approach too. Before Luffy could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring throughout Mariejois. Through the broken windows, they could see marine ships surrounding the Holy Land, their cannons trained on the revolutionary forces. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, came a voice over the den mushy speakers. You have 5 minutes to surrender before we begin bombardment. Dragon's expression hardened. They're going to shell the city. With civilians still inside. Can you get your people out? Not all of them, not in 5 minutes. Dragon looked at his son, and in that moment, the revolutionary and the would-be celestial dragon found common ground. Unless what? Unless a certain saint tells them to stand down. Luffy felt the weight of the choice settle on his shoulders. Use his celestial dragon authority again, save lives, and slide a little further down the slope toward becoming everything he hated. Or refuse, maintain his principles, and watch innocent people die. There was really no choice at all. Get me a den mushy, he said quietly. Fleet frequency. As the snail appeared in his hands, Luffy caught his father's eye one last time. This doesn't make us allies, he said firmly. No, Dragon agreed, but maybe it makes us family. And as Luffy lifted the transponder snail to speak, he wondered if that was enough. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, this is Saint Monkey D. Luffy. You will cease bombardment preparations immediately and withdraw your forces from Mariejois' territorial waters. Luffy's voice carried across the den mushy frequency with the same divine authority he'd used before, but this time it felt different. Heavier, like each word was carving something irreversible into his soul. The response came after a long pause, Sakazuki's voice tight with barely controlled rage. Saint, Luffy. The Revolutionary Army has launched an unprovoked attack on the Holy Land. They must be eliminated. The attack is over. Revolutionary forces are withdrawing as we speak. Luffy glanced at Dragon, who nodded grimly. Any further military action will be considered an attack on celestial dragon sovereignty. You're protecting terrorists. I'm preventing unnecessary bloodshed. Luffy closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his next words. Admiral, you have your orders. Comply or face the consequences. Another long silence. Then, fleet withdrawing. This matter will be reported to the 5 elders. See that it is. As the den mushy went silent, Luffy felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. He just threatened one of the most powerful men in the world, and won. The rush of absolute authority was intoxicating, but underneath it lurked something cold and ugly that he didn't want to examine too closely. Well done, Dragon said quietly. You saved a lot of lives today. Did I, or did I just prove that I'm exactly what they think I am? Before Dragon could answer, the chamber doors burst open again. This time it wasn't revolutionaries, it was a full squad of CP0 agents, their weapons drawn and ready. Stand down, the lead agent commanded. All revolutionary forces will surrender immediately. Actually, Luffy said, not bothering to turn around, they won't. Revolutionary forces are under my protection as they withdraw from Mariejois. Anyone who interferes will answer to me personally. The agents hesitated, clearly caught between conflicting orders. Attack the revolutionaries and risk the wrath of a celestial dragon, or let them escape and face the consequences from their superiors. You heard him, Doflamingo added helpfully. Saint Luffy has claimed right of sanctuary. Unless you want to explain to the 5 elders why you ignored a direct order from a world noble. The lead agent's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then, revolutionary forces have 10 minutes to evacuate Mariejois. After that, sanctuary is revoked. Agreed, Dragon said before Luffy could object. My people will be gone in 5. As the revolutionaries began their organized retreat, Dragon approached his son one last time. Up close, the family resemblance was even more obvious. The same determined set to their jaws, the same fire in their eyes, the same terrible weight of responsibility on their shoulders. This isn't over, Dragon said quietly. Between us, I mean, I know. I still think you're making a mistake, trying to change the system from the inside. It's been tried before, it doesn't work. Maybe they weren't trying hard enough. Luffy met his father's eyes. Or maybe they didn't have the right leverage. Dragon's smile was sad. Power corrupts, son, even with the best intentions. Then I'll have to be stronger than the power. Your mother said something similar once. Dragon reached out, almost touching Luffy's face, then let his hand fall. I hope you have better luck than she did. And then he was gone, melting away into the smoke and chaos like the revolutionary ghost he'd always been. Luffy watched him leave, feeling a complex mix of relief and loss that he didn't have time to process. Touching, one of the 5 elders said dryly. A lovely family reunion. Now, shall we discuss the rather significant problem you've created? The emergency session that followed was unlike anything Luffy had ever experienced. The 5 elders, the remaining celestial dragons, various government officials, and marine commanders all crammed into a secure conference room, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations, demands, and barely controlled panic. The revolutionary attack had shaken them more than they wanted to admit. For the first time in 8 centuries, the Holy Land itself had been violated. The myth of celestial dragon invulnerability had taken a serious blow. And sitting in the middle of it all was Luffy, still wearing his formal clothes and that damned golden circlet, listening to people argue about his fate like he wasn't even there. The boy is clearly compromised, St. Charlos was saying. He protected terrorists. He should be stripped of his status immediately. He prevented a massacre, Mjosgard countered. Both sides would have suffered massive casualties if he hadn't intervened. That's not the point. The bearded elder slammed his hand on the table. A celestial dragon cannot be seen negotiating with revolutionaries. It sets a dangerous precedent. What precedent? Luffy spoke for the first time in an hour, his voice cutting through the argument. That world nobles might actually care about human life. Careful, the sword-bearing elder warned. You're walking a very thin line. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I just did more to protect Mariejois than anyone else in this room. Luffy leaned back in his chair, trying to project the same casual confidence he'd seen Doflamingo display. The revolutionary attack failed. Their forces retreated without achieving their objectives. The Holy Land remains secure. I'd call that a victory. You negotiated with terrorists, St. Roswood repeated. I prevented a war, Luffy corrected. There's a difference. Is there? The blonde elder's voice was silk over steel. Tell me, St. Luffy, when you commanded that marine fleet to stand down, what did you feel? The question was a trap, but Luffy could see the teeth this time. I felt relieved that I could save lives without bloodshed. Nothing else, no. Satisfaction at having your orders obeyed without question. Luffy hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Every person in the room could see the truth on his face. He had enjoyed it. The rush of absolute power, the intoxicating knowledge that reality itself would bend to his will. I thought so, the elder continued. The blood remembers, doesn't it? Even when the mind rebels, the blood remembers what it means to be divine. I'm not divine, Luffy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? You've commanded marine fleets. You've negotiated with world leaders. You've single-handedly prevented a war through nothing but your voice and your authority. The elder's smile was sharp. If that's not divinity, what is? Doflamingo had been silent through most of the argument, but now he leaned forward with that predatory smile of his. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Instead of debating whether St. Luffy's actions were appropriate, we should be asking how we can use them to our advantage. Explain, the mustached elder demanded. The Revolutionary Army's greatest weakness has always been their image problem. To most people, they're terrorists and anarchists, not freedom fighters. But today, they were defeated not by marine might, but by celestial dragon mercy. Doflamingo's smile widened. Imagine the propaganda value. A reformed world noble, reaching out to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. It's exactly the kind of story the common people love. You want to turn me into a poster boy, Luffy said flatly. I want to turn you into a symbol. The proof that the world government can change, can evolve, can become something better than what it's been. Doflamingo's voice turned persuasive. Think about it, how many lives could you save if people believed in the possibility of peaceful reform instead of violent revolution? And if I refuse? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The five elders exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Then you become a liability, the bald elder said quietly, and we deal with liabilities the way we always have, by killing them, by protecting the greater good. Luffy looked around the room, taking in the faces of the most powerful people in the world. Some showed sympathy, others calculation, but all of them were united in one thing: they would do whatever it took to preserve their power. Just like his father would do whatever it took to destroy it. What exactly are you offering? He asked finally. Full restoration to celestial dragon status, the bearded elder replied. Your own palace in Mariejois, a seat on the administrative council. Real power to make the changes you think are necessary. And in exchange, you become the face of a new world government, a kinder, gentler form of divine rule. You tour the world, showing people that celestial dragons can be benevolent. You speak at the Reverie about the need for gradual, peaceful reform instead of violent revolution. You want me to convince people that the system is working. We want you to make the system work, Mjosgard said quietly. For everyone, it was a seductive offer. Real power to make real changes. The ability to help people on a scale he'd never imagined. No more fighting hopeless battles against impossible odds, just the authority to speak and make things better. But at what cost? I need time to think, Luffy said. Of course, the sword elder replied. Take all the time you need. You have until the reverie begins next week. As the meeting broke up, Luffy found himself alone with Doflamingo and his crew. His friends looked shell-shocked, like they'd just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. Well, Nami said finally, that was terrifying, Usopp finished. They're talking about making you into one of them. Actually, officially one of them. I'm already one of them, Luffy replied quietly. The question is what I'm going to do about it. You could walk away, Chopper said hopefully. Mjosgard said it was possible. You could renounce your status, come back to the crew, and we could sail away from all this. And spend the rest of our lives being hunted by both the world government and the revolutionary army, Robin pointed out. There's no going back from this, Luffy. Too many people know the truth now. So what do you think I should do? The question hung in the air like smoke. His crew, his family looked at him with expressions mixing fear, hope, and desperate uncertainty. I think, Zoro said finally, that you should do whatever lets you sleep at night, but whatever you decide, we're with you. Even if I choose to stay, even if I become everything we used to fight against. You're not everything we used to fight against, Sanji said firmly. You're still you, the man who saved my life in Barady, the captain who brought us all together. Whatever title they give you, whatever power you have, that doesn't change. But even as he said it, Luffy could see the doubt in Sanji's eyes. They all had it now, the fear that their captain was slowly becoming someone they didn't recognize, someone they couldn't follow. That night, Luffy stood on the balcony of his temporary quarters, looking out over Mariejois' glittering lights. The city was beautiful at night, all its ugly truths hidden by darkness and distance. It was easy to see why the celestial dragons thought they lived in heaven. Having second thoughts, Doflamingo joined him at the railing, offering a glass of wine that Luffy didn't take. Always, that's healthy. Certainty is the enemy of wisdom. Doflamingo sipped his wine, apparently unbothered by Luffy's rejection of the gesture. Though I have to say, you handled that meeting beautifully. Very. Regal, don't what? Compliment you on discovering your natural talents. Doflamingo's smile was sharp. Face it, cousin, you're good at this. The authority, the negotiation, the political maneuvering. It comes naturally to you, because I'm one of them. Because you're meant to lead, the bloodline is just a convenience. Doflamingo moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Think about what you could accomplish with real power. No more watching your friends get hurt because you weren't strong enough to protect them. No more losing people like Ace because you couldn't command the resources to save them. The words hit their mark. Luffy's hands tightened on the railing as images flashed through his mind, Ace's final moments. His crew's frightened faces during the marine attack, all the people he'd failed to save over the years. The offer they made you, Doflamingo continued, it's real. You could change everything. Reform the system from the inside, make it work for everyone instead of just the privileged few. Isn't that worth some moral compromise? What if I become the thing I'm trying to reform? Then you'll be a better version of that thing than anyone who came before you. Doflamingo's voice turned persuasive. Power doesn't corrupt, Luffy. It reveals. And what it's revealed about you is that you're someone who cares more about protecting people than protecting your own conscience. Before Luffy could respond, a CP0 agent appeared in the doorway, his usual composure somewhat shaken. Saint Doflamingo, Saint Luffy, there's been a development. The Kuja pirates have been captured during a raid on a world government transport. Their empress, Boa Hancock, is being held pending interrogation. Luffy felt his blood turn to ice. What? She was leading an assault on a shipment of slaves being transported to Mariejois. The attack was successful, but her ship was damaged during the escape. Marine forces captured them 3 hours ago. Where is she? Impel down. Level 6. She's scheduled for enhanced interrogation tomorrow morning. The euphemism didn't fool anyone. Enhanced interrogation meant torture. They were going to hurt Hancock to get information about Luffy, or maybe just to send a message about what happened to people who got too close to rogue celestial dragons. You have to help her, Luffy turned to Doflamingo desperately. You're a warlord, you have influence. I have some influence, Doflamingo corrected, but not enough to override a direct order from the 5 elders. And make no mistake, this is their doing. They want to see where your loyalties really lie. What do you mean? Think about it. Hancock attacks a slave transport 3 days after you negotiate with revolutionaries. Her timing is either incredibly coincidental or incredibly planned. Doflamingo's smile was sympathetic but sharp. They're testing you, cousin. Will you use your newfound authority to save someone you care about? And if you do, what will you sacrifice to make it happen? Luffy felt the trap closing around him like a vice. Save Hancock and prove he'd use celestial dragon power for personal gain, abandoning any pretense of moral high ground. Let her suffer and prove he was just as callous as every other world noble. There's a third option, Doflamingo said quietly, reading his expression. Accept their offer. Become the poster boy for reformed world government. And then use your position to quietly arrange Hancock's release. That's not a third option. That's selling my soul on the installment plan. Maybe. Or maybe it's growing up and accepting that sometimes saving the people you love means compromising your principles. Doflamingo finished his wine, setting the glass down with deliberate care. The question is, what's more important to you, your moral purity or her life? As Doflamingo left him alone on the balcony, Luffy stared out at the lights of Mariejois and wondered when everything had become so complicated. In the distance, Impel Down squatted on the horizon like a malignant tumor. Somewhere in its depths, Hancock was probably wondering if anyone was coming to save her. And Luffy was beginning to realize that the only person with the power to do so was wearing a golden circlet and standing in the heart of everything he'd once sworn to destroy. The weight of the crown was getting heavier by the hour. The golden manacles were beautiful. That was the sick part, they were actually beautiful. Crafted from the finest metals, inlaid with precious stones, designed to look more like jewelry than restraints. The world government had centuries of practice making slavery look elegant. Luffy stared at them through the transponder snail's visual feed, watching as they locked around Hancock's wrists in her Impel Down cell. Even transmitted through grainy black and white, he could see the defiance in her eyes. She wasn't broken yet, but she would be. The Pirate Empress is quite resilient, the 5 elders' representative said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. Our interrogation specialists estimate she can withstand perhaps another week of enhanced questioning before her will breaks completely. What do you want? Luffy's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd learned that showing weakness in these negotiations only made things worse. The same thing we've always wanted, your cooperation. The man, some bureaucrat whose name Luffy hadn't bothered to learn, smiled with the practiced ease of someone who delivered ultimatums to world leaders. There's a situation developing in the South Blue. A small island nation called Torino has declared independence from the world government. So they're being supplied by revolutionary forces. Intelligence suggests your father is personally involved in coordinating their rebellion. The man's smile grew sharper. We need someone with both celestial dragon authority and personal investment in stopping revolutionary activities to handle the situation. You want me to crush my father's allies. We want you to restore order to a lawless territory. How you choose to interpret that mission is entirely up to you. The unspoken threat hung in the air like smoke. Refuse and Hancock would suffer. Succeed, and she might live long enough to see freedom again. It was exactly the kind of impossible choice that had been eating away at Luffy's soul for weeks. What's the time frame? You leave tomorrow. The island will surrender within 72 hours of your arrival, or, the man gestured toward the transponder snail where Hancock's image flickered in her cell. Let's just say that prolonged interrogation can be very hard on the human body. After the bureaucrat left, Luffy found himself alone in the conference room with nothing but his thoughts and the weight of the golden circlet on his head. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a pirate captain with simple dreams and cleaner hands. Now he was preparing to destroy an island of people whose only crime was wanting freedom. Having second thoughts, Doflamingo materialized in the doorway like a pink-coated nightmare, his ever-present smile somehow more predatory than usual. Always, Luffy replied, not bothering to look up. Good. Doubt means you're still human. Doflamingo settled into the chair across from him, his movements fluid and controlled. Though I have to say, you're handling this remarkably well. Most people would be screaming about the injustice of it all by now. Would screaming change anything? No, but it would make you feel better about compromising your principles. Doflamingo's laugh was sharp. That's the beauty of moral outrage, it lets you pretend you had a choice when you really didn't. There's always a choice. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you have exactly 2 options. Save the woman you love or let your principles get her killed. Doflamingo leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, cousin, how many of your high-minded ideals is Boa Hancock's life worth? The question hit like a physical blow. Luffy had been asking himself the same thing for hours, and he didn't like the answer he kept coming up with. This is what you wanted, isn't it? He said quietly. From the moment I set foot in Dressrosa, you've been pushing me toward this. I've been teaching you to use the tools you were born with. What you do with those tools is entirely your choice. Doflamingo's smile turned almost gentle. But yes, I wanted you to understand that power without the will to use it is just another form of weakness. And if using it makes me into a monster, then you'll be a monster who saves the people he loves. Personally, I think that's preferable to being a saint who watches them die. Torino Island was everything the world government propaganda said it wasn't. The reports had described a lawless territory overrun by violent revolutionaries, where innocent civilians lived in fear of terrorist attacks. What Luffy found instead was a thriving community of former slaves, political refugees, and ordinary people who'd simply gotten tired of being ground under the world government's heel. The island's capital was small but well-organized, with clean streets, functioning infrastructure, and the kind of genuine happiness that couldn't be manufactured. Children played in the squares while their parents worked in shops and markets that belonged to them, not to distant nobles who'd never seen their faces. It was exactly the kind of place Luffy would have died to protect, once upon a time. Heartbreaking, isn't it? Doflamingo observed, standing beside him on the deck of their warship. All these happy faces, blissfully unaware that their little paradise is about to come crashing down. We don't have to do this, Luffy said, though even he could hear how hollow the words sounded. Don't we? Your girlfriend is counting on you to make the hard choice. Your crew is counting on you to keep them safe from world government retaliation. Hell, even these people are counting on you, they just don't know it yet. How do you figure that? Because if you handle this right, most of them will live through it. If you don't, Doflamingo shrugged. Well, the world government has other ways of dealing with rebel territories, ways that leave a lot more bodies in their wake. As if summoned by his words, a CP0 agent approached with a tactical briefing. The island had maybe 3,000 residents, most of them civilians. Their defenses consisted of a handful of former Revolutionary Army soldiers and whatever weapons they'd managed to acquire through underground channels. Against a full world government task force, they wouldn't last an hour. The locals are requesting a meeting, the agent reported. They want to negotiate terms for their surrender. Do they know who they're negotiating with? Luffy asked. They know you're a celestial dragon. Beyond that, the agent shrugged. Intelligence suggests they're hoping your reputation for mercy will work in their favor. His reputation for mercy. The irony was almost too bitter to swallow. Set up the meeting, Luffy said finally, but make it clear this is a courtesy, not a negotiation. They have one chance to surrender unconditionally. And if they refuse, Luffy looked out at the peaceful island, at the children playing in the streets, at the life his father had helped build from nothing. Then we remind them why people fear the celestial dragons. The island's leadership consisted of exactly what Luffy had expected: idealistic revolutionaries, former slaves, and ordinary people who'd found something worth fighting for. They met in the island's small government building, a modest structure that would have fit in a single room of any celestial dragon palace. Their leader was a woman named Alina, maybe 40 years old, with the kind of scars that spoke of a hard life survived rather than conquered. She looked at Luffy with a mixture of hope and desperation that made his chest ache. Saint Luffy, she said formally, though her voice carried none of the servile deference most people used with celestial dragons. We're honored by your presence. Are you? Luffy took his seat at the head of the table, the golden circlet catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Because I'm here to accept your surrender. That doesn't seem like something worth celebrating. We'd hoped. Your reputation suggests you might be willing to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution that works for everyone. My reputation is based on outdated information. I'm not the man I used to be. The words tasted like ash, but they had the desired effect. The island's leaders exchanged worried glances, their hope beginning to crumble. We have children here, Alina said desperately. Families. People who have never hurt anyone, who just want to live in peace. Then you should have thought of that before declaring independence from the world government. Luffy forced his voice to remain flat, emotionless. You have 24 hours to evacuate all revolutionary personnel and surrender your weapons. After that, we begin pacification operations. Pacification? An older man at the table, someone who looked like he might have been a teacher in his previous life, leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means we take control of your island by whatever means necessary. If you cooperate, casualties will be minimal. If you don't, Luffy let the threat hang in the air. You're talking about murdering innocent people, Alina said, her voice rising. These are former slaves, refugees, people who have suffered enough already. These are revolutionaries and terrorists harboring enemies of the world government, Luffy replied, hating every word. Their previous suffering is irrelevant to their current crimes. You don't mean that? Alina stood, her hands pressed flat against the table. I've heard the stories about you, about the places you've liberated, the people you've saved. This isn't who you are. People change. Luffy met her eyes, seeing his own reflection in her growing despair. Especially when they're forced to choose between their ideals and the lives of people they love. So that's what this is about. Someone's threatening you, The question was too close to the truth. Luffy felt something crack inside his chest, but he pushed the feeling down. Weakness now would doom Hancock and probably get his crew killed in the bargain. "This is about maintaining order," he said. "About preventing the chaos that comes when every island thinks it can declare independence whenever it feels like it." Chaos? The teacher was on his feet now too, his voice shaking with rage. "You call freedom chaos. You call people governing themselves terrorism. I call armed rebellion against legitimate authority exactly what it is: treason." Luffy stood as well, his presence filling the small room like a storm front. "And I call the consequences of that treason entirely predictable." For a moment, nobody moved. The island's leaders stared at him with expressions mixing disbelief, fear, and something that might have been pity. They were looking at him the way people looked at a rabid dog, dangerous, but ultimately more tragic than threatening. "We need time to discuss this," Alina said finally. "To prepare our people." "You have 24 hours, Luffy repeated. "I suggest you use them wisely." As he left the building, Luffy caught sight of a small park across the street. Children were playing there, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. A few of them waved at him as he passed, their faces bright with the kind of innocent curiosity that hadn't yet learned to fear authority. One of them, a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, broke away from her friends and ran toward him. "Are you really a prince?" she asked, staring up at the golden circlet with obvious fascination. "Something like that," Luffy managed. "My mama says princes are supposed to protect people. Is that what you're here to do?" The question hit him like a sledgehammer. Luffy looked down at this child, innocent, trusting, completely unaware that her entire world was about to come crashing down, and felt something fundamental break inside his soul. "Yeah," he whispered, "that's what I'm here to do." The lie tasted like poison, but the little girl just smiled and ran back to her friends, chattering excitedly about meeting a real prince. "Touching," Doflamingo said, appearing at his elbow like a bad conscience made flesh. "Though I have to say you handled that meeting beautifully, very authoritative, very regal." "They're going to fight," Luffy said quietly. "These people won't surrender, they'll fight and we'll have to kill them." "Probably. Revolutionary types tend to prefer death to submission. It's one of their more admirable qualities, actually." Doflamingo's voice carried a note of genuine respect. "The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean tomorrow, when the deadline expires, you're going to have to make a choice. Use your authority to end this quickly and cleanly, or let your subordinates turn this into a bloodbath that drags on for days." Doflamingo's smile was sharp. "Either way, people die. The only question is how many, and how much responsibility you're willing to take for their deaths." That night, Luffy stood on the deck of their warship, staring across the water at Torino Island. The lights were on in every building, families gathered around dinner tables, children being tucked into bed, people living their lives in blissful ignorance of what tomorrow would bring. Somewhere in those lights was the little girl who'd asked if he was there to protect people. Tomorrow, he was going to prove that he wasn't. "Captain," Luffy turned to find Nami approaching, her expression troubled. His crew had been giving him space since Mariejois, unsure how to relate to the person he was becoming. But tonight, something had driven her to break that careful distance. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Whatever they're threatening you with, whatever they've said they'll do, you don't have to become this person." "Don't I?" Luffy's laugh was bitter. "They have Hancock, Nami. They're torturing her right now, and they'll keep torturing her until I prove I'm exactly the kind of monster they want me to be. So we rescue her. We break into Impel Down, we fight our way out, and then what? We spend the rest of our lives running from both the world government and the revolutionary army. We watch everyone who's ever helped us get hunted down and killed." Luffy shook his head. "I won't let you suffer for my choices." "Our choices," Nami corrected firmly. "We're a crew. We face things together. Not this time." Luffy turned back to the island, to the lights that would be extinguished tomorrow because of his weakness. "This time I face it alone." "You're not alone," Nami said desperately. "You'll never be alone. Whatever you've become, whatever you think you have to do, we're still here. We're still your crew." But even as she said it, Luffy could hear the uncertainty in her voice. They were still his crew, but for how much longer? How many more compromises, how many more innocent deaths before they stopped recognizing the person they were following? "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As Nami reluctantly left him alone, Luffy pulled out a small transponder snail, his private line to the World Government Monitoring Station. Hancock's image flickered on the screen, showing her chained in her cell, her body bearing fresh marks from the day's interrogation. She looked directly at the camera, as if she knew he was watching, and mouthed a single word. Don't sacrifice innocent people for her sake. Don't become everything they both hated just to save her life. Don't let them win by turning him into a monster. But as Luffy watched her image fade to static, he realized it was already too late. Tomorrow, when the deadline expired, he would give the order. The island would surrender or burn, and either way, he would have crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The little girl who'd asked if he was there to protect people would learn the truth about princes and power and the terrible prices that both demanded. And somewhere in the darkness between his noble intentions and his monstrous actions, the last pieces of Monkey D. Luffy would finally disappear, leaving only Saint Luffy in their wake. The chains of gold were tightening around his soul, and he was beginning to wonder if he even wanted to break free anymore. 24 hours passed like a death sentence counting down. Luffy stood on the bridge of the world government warship, watching Torino Island through the pre-dawn darkness. The lights that had twinkled so peacefully the night before were fewer now. Many families had evacuated to the center of the island, clustering together like frightened animals sensing a predator's approach. But not all of them had left. Through his binoculars, Luffy could see movement in the coastal buildings. The island's defenders were taking positions, preparing for a fight they couldn't possibly win. "Deadline's up," the CP0 commander reported, his voice crisp and professional. Still no word from the island leadership. "They've made their choice," Doflamingo said, materializing beside Luffy like a pink-coated specter. "Time to make yours, cousin." Luffy lowered the binoculars, his hands surprisingly steady. 3 weeks ago, the thought of bombarding a peaceful island would have been unthinkable. Now it felt inevitable, like gravity or death or any other natural force. "Signal the fleet," he said quietly. "Begin the bombardment." The order went out across the radio frequencies, and within moments, the morning air exploded with thunder. Cannon fire erupted from 6 warships simultaneously, their shells arcing through the dawn sky like falling stars. The first impact sent pillars of smoke and flame rising from the island's outer defenses. Buildings collapsed. The small harbor's pier disintegrated under concentrated fire. And somewhere in that inferno, people were running and screaming and dying because Saint Monkey D. Luffy had given the word. "Excellent," Doflamingo murmured. "Very decisive, very authoritative." Something in his tone made Luffy turn. There was satisfaction in Doflamingo's voice, but underneath it lurked something else. Something that sounded almost like relief. "You seem pleased," Luffy observed. "Shouldn't I be? My student is finally learning to use his power properly." Doflamingo's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Though I have to admit it took longer than I expected. You're remarkably stubborn about clinging to useless ideals." Useless, mercy, justice, the sanctity of human life, all beautiful concepts, but ultimately impractical when dealing with the real world. Doflamingo gestured toward the burning island. "Power is the only thing that matters, cousin. The power to make your will reality, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it." Another wave of cannon fire lit up the dawn. Through the smoke, Luffy could see return fire from the island, pitiful small arms resistance that barely scratched the warship's armored hulls. "Sir," a marine officer approached with a tactical report. "Coastal defenses have been neutralized. Requesting permission to begin landing operations." "Granted," Luffy replied automatically. "Establish a beachhead and advance inland. Rules of engagement. Standard pacification protocols, sir. Resistance fighters are to be eliminated. Civilians who surrender are to be detained for questioning." The euphemisms made it easier somehow. Pacification protocols sounded so much cleaner than massacre anyone who fights back. Detained for questioning was more palatable than imprisoned indefinitely without trial. But Luffy was beginning to understand that the language was the point. The world government had spent centuries perfecting the art of making atrocities sound reasonable. "Execute," he ordered. Landing craft launched from the warships like mechanical wasps, carrying Marines and CP agents toward the burning shore. From the bridge, Luffy watched them establish their beachhead with professional efficiency. The first wave secured the harbor. The second wave moved inland toward the residential areas. That's when the screaming started. It wasn't the sound of soldiers dying in battle. It was something else higher pitched, more desperate. The sound of terror from people who had nowhere left to run. "Reports coming in from the landing forces," the communications officer announced. "Encountering unexpectedly heavy civilian resistance, many non-combatants refusing to surrender." "Define non-combatants," Doflamingo said with obvious amusement. "Elderly civilians, sir, some women with children there. They're forming human shields around suspected revolutionary positions." The words hit Luffy like a physical blow. He grabbed the radio handset, his voice cracking as he spoke. All forces hold position. Do not fire on civilian targets. Sir, the civilians are interfering with mission objectives. I said hold position. The authority in Luffy's voice brought immediate compliance, but he could feel the confusion radiating from his subordinates. Decisive action was expected. Hesitation was weakness. Problem? Doflamingo asked mildly. They're using children as shields. Clever, force you to either kill innocents or fail your mission. Doflamingo's smile widened. I wonder who taught them that particular tactic. Something cold crawled up Luffy's spine. What do you mean? Oh, nothing specific. Just that revolutionary forces are remarkably well informed about world government psychological warfare protocols. Almost like someone with inside knowledge has been advising them. The pieces began falling into place with horrible clarity. The timing of Hancock's capture, just convenient enough to force Luffy's hand. The island's declaration of independence, coming at exactly the wrong moment to create maximum political pressure. Even the civilians' tactical use of human shields, it was all too perfectly calculated. You, Luffy whispered. You orchestrated this. Orchestrated what? Doflamingo's innocence was as false as his smile. I'm just here to observe your first real test as a proper celestial dragon. The revolutionaries, the attack on Mariejois. Hancock's capture, all of it. Fufu, you give me too much credit, cousin, though I suppose I might have provided certain parties with certain information that certain other parties might have found useful. Luffy's hands clenched into fists. You set this up, all of it, you wanted me to become this. I wanted you to accept what you are, there's a difference. Doflamingo's voice turned serious, almost paternal. You were fighting your nature, cousin. Clinging to childish fantasies about right and wrong when the world is painted in nothing but shades of gray. I simply provided the proper motivation for you to evolve. By manipulating everyone around me. By putting innocent people in danger. By showing you that there are no innocent people. Everyone is complicit in the system, whether they admit it or not. The only choice is whether you control the system or let it control you. Before Luffy could respond, new reports crackled over the radio. The Marine advance had stalled completely. The island's defenders weren't just using civilian shields, they were fighting from hospitals, schools, and nursing homes. Every building the Marines needed to secure contained people who couldn't fight back but refused to get out of the way. Sir, the tactical officer reported, ground forces are requesting clarification on rules of engagement. Current civilian interference makes mission completion impossible without significant collateral damage. How significant? Doflamingo asked before Luffy could speak. Estimated civilian casualties in the hundreds, sir, possibly thousands if we proceed with standard pacification protocols. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Hundreds of people, thousands. The little girl who'd asked if he was there to protect people, her friends playing in the park, their parents and grandparents and siblings. All dead because St. Luffy couldn't find the strength to be what he used to be. Well, Doflamingo pressed. What are your orders? Complete the mission and accept the casualties. Or fail your first real test as a celestial dragon. Luffy closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back on Marineford's execution platform. Ace was smiling at him through the flames, that same gentle expression he'd worn in their final moments together. Live without regret, Ace had said. Live free. But there was nothing free about this. Nothing free about becoming a monster to save the people you loved. Nothing free about letting innocent children die because you were too weak to accept the consequences of defying power. Ace wouldn't have wanted this. Ace would have found another way or died trying. The realization hit Luffy like lightning. All forces, he said into the radio, his voice carrying a strength he'd forgotten he possessed, immediate withdrawal to the landing zone. Sir, the communications officer looked confused. You heard me, pull back, full retreat. But sir, the CP0 commander protested, the mission parameters specifically, the mission parameters are cancelled. Luffy turned to face Doflamingo, and for the first time in weeks, his smile was genuine. All forces will withdraw immediately. Torino Island is under my protection as a celestial dragon sanctuary. Doflamingo's expression shifted from amusement to something harder. That's not your decision to make, isn't it? I'm a world noble. My authority supersedes everyone on this task force. Luffy's conqueror's haki began to build, making the air itself feel heavy. The island is mine now. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with the 5 elders. You're making a mistake, Doflamingo warned, his own haki rising to meet Luffy's. Walk away from this mission, and they'll know you can't be controlled. They'll find other ways to motivate you. Let them try. They have your crew, they have Hancock, they have every person you've ever cared about, and they'll use all of them against you if necessary. Doflamingo's voice turned desperate. You think you can save these people, you'll doom everyone else in the process. Maybe, or maybe I'll find a way to save them all. Luffy's haki exploded outward, shattering every window on the bridge and driving everyone except Doflamingo to their knees. But I know one thing for sure, I won't become a monster just because it's convenient. You already are a monster, Doflamingo snarled, his strings shooting out to wrap around Luffy's limbs. You think using celestial dragon authority makes you noble. You think commanding fleets and threatening admirals is heroic. You're already everything you claim to hate. Then I'll be a different kind of monster. Luffy's rubber body twisted impossibly, breaking free of the strings with casual ease. The kind that protects people instead of exploiting them. Naive fool, Doflamingo's strings multiplied, creating a cage of razor wire around the entire bridge. You can't change the system. You can't redeem power that's fundamentally corrupt. All you can do is choose whether to wield it or let someone else wield it against you. Watch me. The battle that erupted on the bridge was like nothing the Marines had ever witnessed. Doflamingo's strings turned the air into a web of cutting edges, each one sharp enough to slice steel. But Luffy moved through them like they weren't there, his body stretching and twisting in ways that defied physics. Gomu Gomu no, Luffy pulled his arm back, coating it in haki so dense it turned black as night. Red Hawk, the punch connected with Doflamingo's chest, sending him crashing through the bridge's reinforced walls and out into the morning air. For a moment, the warlord hung suspended over the ocean, his pink coat billowing like broken wings. Then he began to fall. But even as he plummeted toward the waves, Doflamingo was laughing. You think you've won? He called out, his voice carrying over the water. You think saving one island makes you a hero? Look around you, cousin. Look at what you've become. Luffy did look around. At the Marine officers staring at him in shock and fear. At his crew, who'd watched him order the bombardment of innocent people without protest. At the golden circlet still resting on his head, marking him as one of the most powerful people in the world. Doflamingo was right about one thing, he had become a monster. But maybe that was okay, as long as he was the right kind of monster. Sir, the communications officer was back on his feet, panic clear in his voice. Emergency transmission from Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. We have incoming. Through the bridge's shattered windows, Luffy could see them approaching, a dozen more warships, these ones flying the banner of Marine headquarters. And leading them was a vessel he recognized from wanted posters and nightmares. Sakazuki's personal flagship. Saint Luffy, came a voice over the emergency frequency, cold and implacable as volcanic rock. By order of the 5 elders, you are relieved of command. Surrender immediately for transport back to Mariejois. The trap had been sprung. Doflamingo's manipulation had worked perfectly, not to turn Luffy into a compliant celestial dragon, but to force him into open defiance that would justify his elimination. Well, Nami said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the ruined railing. I guess we're pirates again. Were we ever anything else? Zoro asked, his swords already in his hands. Probably not, Robin agreed, her arms blooming across the bridge as she prepared for battle. One by one, his crew moved to join him, Sanji lighting his cigarette with casual defiance, Chopper transforming into his combat form, Frankie's cannons deploying with mechanical precision. They were hopelessly outnumbered, impossibly outgunned, and facing the most powerful military force in the world, and they were smiling. So, Usopp said, checking his slingshot with shaking hands, "What's the plan, Captain?" Luffy looked out at the approaching fleet, at the impossible odds and certain death waiting in those black hulls. Then he looked at his crew, his family, who'd followed him through hell and were prepared to follow him through whatever came next. Same plan as always, he said, his grin as bright as the dawn breaking over Torino Island. We fight. We win, we protect the people who can't protect themselves. And if we lose, then we go down swinging. Luffy pulled the golden circlet from his head and crushed it in his fist, letting the twisted metal fall into the ocean below. But we go down as ourselves. As the Marine fleet closed in around them, Luffy felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks, the simple, clean certainty of knowing he was doing the right thing. The cost would be enormous. The consequences might be fatal. But for the first time since Marineford, Monkey D. Luffy was exactly where he belonged, standing between the innocent and those who would harm them, crown or no crown. The first salvo from Sakazuki's fleet turned the morning sky into a symphony of destruction. Cannonballs the size of boulders screamed through the air, their trajectories calculated to sink everything in the water around Torino Island. The world government wasn't taking chances. They meant to obliterate not just Luffy's task force, but any evidence that Saint Monkey D. Luffy had ever existed. Evasive maneuvers, Luffy shouted over the thunder of approaching shells. Get us between the island and their main force. On it! Nami spun the ship's wheel with practiced precision, using the warship's superior maneuverability to thread between the incoming fire. Explosions erupted around them, close enough to spray the deck with seawater and shrapnel. Frankie, can you get our guns online? Already on it, bro. Frankie's mechanical arms were flying over the weapon's controls, bringing the warship's cannons to bear on their attackers. But we're outgunned about 20-1 here, then we make every shot count. Luffy grabbed the ship's den mushy, switching to the emergency broadcast frequency. This is Monkey D. Luffy to all vessels in the area. I am no longer operating under Celestial Dragon authority. Any Marine personnel who wish to withdraw will not be pursued. The offer was sincere, but Luffy wasn't surprised when no ships peeled away from Sakazuki's formation. These weren't ordinary Marines, they were hand-picked loyalists who would follow orders even if it meant sailing into hell itself. Luffy, Sakazuki's voice crackled over the radio, cold as winter and twice as merciless. You've made your choice, now live with the consequences. The second salvo was twice as heavy as the first. This time there was nowhere to run. Sakazuki had positioned his ships in a perfect encirclement, their overlapping fields of fire creating a killing zone that no vessel could escape. Zoro, Luffy called out, I see it. The swordsman was already moving, his 3 blades flashing as he intercepted the closest shells. 3-sword style, Tatsumaki. The tornado of cutting wind sent a dozen cannonballs spinning harmlessly into the ocean, but there were too many to stop. One slammed into their ship's stern, tearing away a chunk of armor plating. Another punched through the main mast, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. We can't keep this up, Usopp shouted, loading his slingshot with explosive pellets. They're gonna pound us to pieces. Then we take the fight to them. Luffy looked at his crew, his family, and saw the same desperate determination reflected in their eyes. Robin, can you get us close enough to board one of those ships? If you can give me 30 seconds of distraction. Sanji, Chopper, Frankie, make some noise, draw their fire. Luffy cracked his knuckles, his body already stretching as he prepared for what might be their final battle. Time to remind them why they used to be afraid of the Straw Hat Pirates. The counterattack was magnificent in its futility. Frankie's cannons lit up the morning with return fire while Sanji launched himself into the air, his flaming kicks deflecting incoming shells. Chopper had transformed into his monster form, using his massive strength to physically catch and redirect cannonballs back at their attackers. It was brave. It was desperate. It was exactly the kind of impossible stand that had made the Straw Hats legendary. And it was working. Mille fleurs, Robin's arms bloomed across the water, creating a bridge of interlocking limbs that stretched toward the nearest marine vessel. Hurry, I can't hold this for long. Luffy didn't hesitate. He launched himself across Robin's bridge with his crew close behind, their footsteps thundering on the improvised causeway. Marine sharpshooters opened fire from the target ship's deck, their bullets whining through the air like angry insects. Gomu no, Luffy pulled his arm back, coating it in haki until it gleamed like black steel. Jet Gatling, the barrage of punches cleared the enemy deck in seconds, sending Marines flying in all directions. But even as his crew spread out to secure the ship, Luffy could see more vessels closing in around them. This was just the beginning. Captain, a familiar voice cut through the chaos, and Luffy turned to see a figure he'd hoped never to encounter again. Vice Admiral Momonga stood on the bridge of his own ship, which had pulled alongside during the boarding action. His expression was grim but determined as he drew his sword. Stand down, Straw Hat, there's no escape from this. There never was, Luffy replied, settling into a fighting stance. That was never the point. Then what is the point? Throwing your life away for a handful of revolutionaries on some backwater island. Momonga's blade gleamed in the morning light. You could have been a celestial dragon, you could have had everything. I had everything that mattered. Luffy looked back at his crew, who were fighting desperately to hold their captured position. I had people who believed in me, people worth protecting. And now they're all going to die because of your stubbornness. Maybe, but they'll die as themselves, not as slaves to someone else's vision of order. Momonga attacked without further warning, his sword work precise and deadly. He was one of the Marines' best fighters, his technique honed by decades of combat against the world's most dangerous pirates. But Luffy wasn't the same person who'd struggled against Marine vice admirals in the past. Weeks of living with absolute authority had taught him things about power and will that no amount of training could provide. When he moved now, it was with the confidence of someone who'd commanded fleets and negotiated with world leaders. Gomu no Red Hawk. The flaming punch punched through Momonga's guard like it wasn't there, sending the vice admiral crashing into his ship's mainmast. But even as he fell, more Marines were boarding from adjacent vessels. The trap was closing tighter with every passing moment. "This is hopeless," Nami called out, her climatact sparking with electrical energy. "There are too many of them," she was right. For every Marine they defeated, 2 more took their place. The Straw Hats were strong, but they weren't strong enough to fight the entire world government navy. Not alone. That's when the unexpected happened. Cannon fire erupted from behind Sakazuki's main formation, but these shells weren't aimed at Luffy's position. They were targeting the Marine fleet itself, punching holes in warship hulls and sending plumes of smoke rising from damaged vessels. "What the hell?" Sakazuki's voice crackled over the radio, his usual composure shaken. "Fleet Admiral," came a new voice, calm and collected despite the chaos. "This is Trafalgar Law, captain of the Heart Pirates. I'm here to collect my ally." Through the smoke and confusion, Luffy could see the distinctive yellow submarine surfacing between the Marine vessels, its cannons already swiveling toward new targets. But Law wasn't alone. Other ships were appearing on the horizon, flying flags that Luffy recognized with growing amazement. The Red Hair Pirates, the Whitebeard remnants under Marco. Even Buggy's ridiculous circus fleet was steaming toward the battle at full speed. "Seems like you've made quite an impression." Law's voice came from right behind him, and Luffy spun to see the Surgeon of Death materializing on the captured warship's deck. "Word got out about a certain Straw Hat taking on the world government. Funny how that kind of news spreads." "Law, what are you doing here? Paying a debt. You helped me take down Doflamingo once upon a time. Seems only fair to return the favor." Law's smile was sharp as his blade. "Besides, someone needs to keep you from getting yourself killed in a fit of idealistic stupidity." The battle had transformed from an execution into a full-scale naval war. Pirate ships clashed with Marine vessels across miles of ocean, their cannon fire turning the morning air thick with smoke and the screams of the wounded. It was chaos on an unprecedented scale. And in the middle of it all, Sakazuki's flagship was cutting through the confusion like a red-hot knife, heading straight for Luffy's position. "He's coming," Zoro observed, wiping blood from a cut on his cheek. "And he looks pissed. Can you blame him?" Luffy cracked his knuckles, already feeling his body heat up as his gear second activated. "I did just cost him his perfect trap. You want backup for this one?" "No." Luffy looked at his swordsman, his oldest and most loyal crew member, and smiled. "This one's personal. Keep the others safe." Before anyone could object, Luffy launched himself across the water towards Sakazuki's approaching flagship. The fleet admiral was waiting for him on the bow, his entire body radiating heat waves that distorted the air around him. "Monkey D. Luffy," Sakazuki said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of distant battle. "Do you have any idea what you've cost us today? A few ships, some reputation damage." Luffy landed on the flagship's deck, the metal plates beneath his feet already beginning to glow red-hot. "Seemed worth it to me. You've cost us stability, order, the certainty that even the most rebellious elements can be brought to heel when necessary." Sakazuki's fist began to glow, molten rock dripping between his fingers. "That cannot be allowed to stand. Then stop me." The fight that erupted between them was like watching 2 forces of nature collide. Sakazuki's magma fists left craters in the ship's armored deck, while Luffy's rubber body stretched and twisted to avoid the deadly heat. Each exchange sent shockwaves through the vessel's hull. "You think this changes anything?" Sakazuki snarled, his magma forming into massive fists that hammered down like meteors. "You think saving one island makes you a hero?" "I think doing the right thing is its own reward," Luffy replied, dodging between the attacks with impossible agility. "Something you never learned. The right thing?" Sakazuki's laugh was bitter as volcanic ash. "I've spent my entire career doing the right thing, protecting innocent civilians from pirates and criminals. Maintaining the order that keeps the world from descending into chaos. By burning children alive, by turning people into slaves, by crushing anyone who dares to dream of something better." Luffy's haki flared, turning his fist black as night. "That's not order, Sakazuki. That's just fear wearing a uniform. Better fear than anarchy, better freedom than slavery." Their final exchange shook the entire flagship. Sakazuki's ultimate attack, a massive eruption of molten rock that could have leveled a city, met Luffy's gear fourth punch head-on. The collision sent a shockwave across the entire battlefield, momentarily silencing every other fight as both sides stared in amazement. When the smoke cleared, both fighters were still standing. Barely. You can't win, Sakazuki gasped, magma dripping from wounds across his torso. Even if you defeat me, there will be others. The system is bigger than any one person. I know, Luffy replied, his own body steaming from overexertion. That's why I'm not trying to defeat the system. What? I'm not trying to destroy the world government or overthrow the celestial dragons or even become the pirate king anymore. Luffy straightened up, his voice gaining strength despite his injuries. I'm trying to do something different, something better. And what's that? Luffy looked out over the battlefield, at the ships burning in the distance, at his crew fighting desperately to reach him, at the island full of innocent people whose only crime was wanting to be free. I'm going to liberate the world, he said simply. Not through conquest or revolution or political maneuvering. I'm going to show people that there's another way. That freedom isn't something you take by force, it's something you live by choice. Sakazuki stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he began to laugh. Liberation? You naive fool. You can't liberate people from themselves. They want to be led. They want someone else to make the hard choices. That's human nature. Maybe. Or maybe they just haven't seen a better example yet. Before Sakazuki could respond, new alarms began blaring across his ship. Through the smoke, they could see what was causing the panic. Every pirate vessel in the area was converging on their position, their crews preparing for one final, decisive assault. This isn't over, Sakazuki warned, his body already beginning to glow with renewed heat. No, Luffy agreed. It's just beginning. The final battle for Torino Island raged until sunset, leaving the ocean littered with burning ships and exhausted fighters. When the smoke finally cleared, the Marines had withdrawn, their fleet too damaged to continue the assault. Luffy stood on the beach of Torino Island, surrounded by his crew and the civilians they'd saved. The little girl who'd asked if he was there to protect people ran up to him, her face bright with curiosity. "Are you still a prince?" she asked. Luffy knelt down to her level, his smile gentle despite the cuts and bruises covering his face. "No, I'm something better. What's that? I'm free." As the sun set over the liberated island, Luffy looked out at the endless ocean and felt something he hadn't experienced since before Ace died: genuine hope for the future. He wasn't Pirate King anymore. He wasn't a celestial dragon. He wasn't a revolutionary or a marine or anything else that someone else had tried to make him. He was exactly what he'd always been meant to be, Monkey D. Luffy, captain of the Straw Hat Pirates and the freest man on the seas. The crown of thorns he'd worn for so long finally crumbled to dust, leaving nothing behind but the endless possibility of tomorrow. 3 months after Torino Island, the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Luffy stood on the deck of the Thousand Sunny, watching Mariejois grow larger on the horizon. But this time, he wasn't approaching as a prisoner or a reluctant prince. This time, he was coming home to tear down everything his bloodline had built. The fleet behind him was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Revolutionary ships sailed alongside pirate vessels. Former Marines who'd grown disgusted with their orders fought beside escaped slaves seeking justice. Even some world government officials had joined the cause, bureaucrats and administrators who'd spent years watching atrocities committed in the name of order. "Hell of a sight," Zoro commented, joining him at the rail. "Never thought I'd see the day when pirates and revolutionaries would work together." "Desperate times," Luffy replied, but his voice carried satisfaction rather than resignation. Turns out a lot of people were just waiting for someone to show them it was possible. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of impossible alliances. After Torino Island, word had spread like wildfire. Monkey D. Luffy, the celestial dragon who'd chosen freedom over power, was building something new. Not a revolution exactly and not a conquest, but something that transcended both. A liberation. Captain, Robin approached with a tactical report, her expression mixing excitement with concern. "Our scouts confirm that Mariejois' defenses have been significantly reinforced. They know we're coming." "Good," Luffy said simply. "Means they're taking us seriously." They've also moved the celestial dragons to secure locations deep within the palace complex. Getting to them won't be easy. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, someone would have done it centuries ago. Through his binoculars, Luffy could see the massive fortress that crowned the Red Line. Mariejois looked exactly as he remembered: pristine white walls reaching toward heaven, golden spires catching the morning light, beautiful and terrible in its absolute perfection. But he knew things about it now that he hadn't known before. Secret passages that Mjosgard had shown him during his time there. Weak points in the defenses that only someone with celestial dragon knowledge would recognize. The exact locations of the slave quarters, the treasure vaults, and most importantly, the chamber of authority where the 5 elders made their decisions. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Begin the approach. And remember, we're not here to conquer Mariejois, we're here to liberate it." The distinction mattered more than most people realized. This wasn't about replacing one power structure with another. It was about proving that power itself could be dismantled, that the age of gods ruling over mortals could finally end. "All ships, this is Admiral Monkey D. Luffy." He spoke into the fleet-wide communication system, using the title they'd given him not for its authority, but for its symbolism. "Today we don't fight for conquest or revenge. We fight for the simple idea that every person has the right to determine their own fate. Let's show the world what freedom really looks like." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Battle cries echoed across the water in a dozen different languages as hundreds of ships surged toward the Red Line. Pirates and revolutionaries, slaves and nobles, all united in the belief that something better was possible. The first salvo from Mariejois' coastal batteries was devastating. Massive cannons hidden in the cliff face opened fire, their shells large enough to sink battleships with single hits. But the Allied fleet had prepared for this. Smaller, faster vessels wove between the larger ships, using their speed and maneuverability to confuse the targeting systems. "Dragon's forces are beginning their assault on the eastern approach," Nami reported, consulting the tactical displays. "Marco's leading the aerial attack from the south, and Law says his submarine division is in position to breach the underwater defenses." "What about our special guests?" Luffy asked. "Approaching from the north as planned, though I still think trusting them is insane." Luffy's smile was sharp. "Sometimes insane is exactly what you need." The special guests were the most controversial part of their alliance, a small group of reformed celestial dragons led by Saint Mjosgard. Not all the world nobles were irredeemable monsters, it turned out. Some, like his biological grandfather, had spent years quietly working to undermine the system from within. "Incoming transmission from Mariejois," the communications officer announced. It's one of the 5 elders." The familiar voice crackled over the speakers, cold and imperious despite the chaos erupting around the Holy Land. "Monkey D. Luffy, you have one final chance to surrender. Call off this assault and we'll consider a negotiated settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Luffy asked, though he already knew the answer. "Full pardons for your followers in exchange for your unconditional surrender. They go free. You face judgment for your crimes against heaven." It was the same offer tyrants had been making for millennia: sacrifice the leader to save the followers. And like every other time it had been offered, it was a lie. The world government would never let this many rebels simply walk away. "Counteroffer," Luffy replied. "You surrender unconditionally and I'll make sure the trials are fair." The silence that followed spoke volumes. "So be it," the elder said finally. "You've chosen your path, now face the consequences." The real battle began with an earthquake. Mariejois' ultimate defense wasn't its cannons or its armies, it was the Red Line itself. Deep beneath the Holy Land, ancient mechanisms activated for the first time in centuries. The massive cliff face began to shift and change, opening new gun ports and revealing weapon systems that belonged in nightmares rather than reality. "What the hell is that?" Frankie shouted, pointing at a section of cliff that was reconfiguring itself into what looked like a massive energy cannon. "Pluton-class artillery," Robin breathed, her face pale with recognition. "I've read about these in the poneglyphs. Ancient weapons integrated into Mariejois' defenses." The first blast from the ancient weapon vaporized 3 ships instantly, leaving nothing but superheated steam where they'd been floating moments before. But instead of breaking the Allied fleet's resolve, the display of overwhelming force seemed to galvanize them. They'd come too far and sacrificed too much to be turned back by impossible odds. "All ships spread formation," Luffy commanded. "Don't give them concentrated targets, and remember, we're not here to match their firepower, we're here to get inside." The assault that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Hundreds of ships swarmed toward the Red Line like angry insects, some falling to the ancient defenses, but many more breaking through. Revolutionary forces scaled the cliff face using modified grappling equipment, while pirate crews fired improvised boarding bridges at the lower ramparts. And at the center of it all, the Thousand Sunny carved through the chaos like a ship possessed. Luffy stood at her bow, his conqueror's haki flaring in waves that disrupted enemy targeting systems and gave his allies openings to exploit. There, Nami pointed toward a section of the cliff where Mjosgard's insider knowledge had indicated a hidden entrance. "The old slave tunnels, if we can reach them." we're going in." Luffy turned to his crew, seeing the same mix of determination and terror that had carried them through every impossible battle they'd ever fought. "Remember, once we're inside, stick together. This isn't just enemy territory, it's home field advantage for people who have had 8 centuries to prepare nasty surprises." The landing was rough but successful. Robin's powers created a bridge of arms that carried them from the Sunny to a narrow ledge barely visible among the cliff's natural features. One by one, the Straw Hats disappeared into the hidden entrance, leaving their ship to continue the battle without them. The tunnels beneath Mariejois were a nightmare made manifest. Centuries of slavery had left their mark on every surface. The walls were covered with scratches and carvings, desperate messages from people who'd never expected to see daylight again. Names and dates and final words scratched into stone by fingernails and makeshift tools. "This is where they brought the new slaves," Luffy said quietly as they navigated the narrow passages. "To break them. To make them understand that resistance was futile." "How do you know that?" Chopper asked, his voice small in the oppressive darkness. "Because Mjosgard told me. He wanted me to understand what we were really fighting against." Luffy's hands clenched into fists. "What my family built their paradise on top of." The tunnels eventually opened into a vast underground complex maintenance areas and storage facilities that kept Mariejois functioning. But they weren't empty. Hundreds of people moved through the corridors with the efficiency of those who'd worked there for years. Slaves, still in chains after all this time. "We can free them," Sanji said immediately. "Break their chains, get them out of here." "No," Luffy said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not yet. If we start freeing slaves now, the celestial dragons will know exactly where we are. We have to reach the top first, cut off the head of the system before we can save its victims." It was a brutal calculation, but a necessary one. Save a few hundred slaves now and lose the chance to liberate millions, or press on toward the greater goal and hope they weren't too late. The climb through Mariejois' interior was like ascending through layers of hell. Each level revealed new horrors: auction houses, where people were sold like livestock, laboratories where medical experiments were conducted on unwilling subjects, pleasure districts where the worst impulses of absolute power were given free rein. And everywhere, the casual indifference of people who'd never seen their victims as human. "How?" Usopp whispered as they witnessed a group of celestial dragons casually discussing the execution of an entire island's population over afternoon tea. "How do people become this? Empty." 800 years of being told you're gods," Robin replied. 800 years of never facing consequences for your actions. Power without responsibility doesn't just corrupt, it hollows you out until there's nothing left but appetite. They were nearing the palace's upper levels when the first alarms began sounding. Not the general battle alarms that had been echoing through the city for hours, but something more specific, more urgent. "Security breach in Sector 7, came an announcement over the internal communication system. "Intruders have penetrated the residential levels, all guards to emergency stations." "They know we're here," Zoro observed, his swords already in his hands. "Then we go fast and loud from here on out." Luffy cracked his knuckles, his body already beginning to steam as Gear 2nd activated. Straight to the Chamber of Authority, no more sneaking around. What followed was a running battle through the most secure building in the world. CP0 agents appeared from hidden panels, their training and equipment representing the pinnacle of government assassination technology. But they were fighting an enemy they'd never truly prepared for, someone who knew their tactics, their roots, and their psychology better than they knew themselves. Gomu no. Luffy's fist stretched down the corridor, taking out 3 agents with a single punch. Jet Gatling, behind him, his crew fought with the desperate efficiency of people who knew they were humanity's last hope. Zoro carved through reinforced doors like they were made of paper. Sanji's flaming kicks left crater patterns in marble walls. Robin sprouted arms from every surface, turning the palace's own architecture against its defenders. But it was when they reached the Chamber of Authority that the real battle began. The 5 elders were waiting for them, and they weren't alone. The chamber had been turned into a fortress, with dozens of the world government's most elite agents positioned at strategic points. And at the center of it all, sitting calmly at their ancient table, were the 5 men who'd ruled the world for longer than most nations had existed. "Monkey D. Luffy," the bearded elder said conversationally, as if they were meeting for afternoon tea rather than the final confrontation of an 8th century war. "Welcome home." "This isn't my home," Luffy replied, settling into a fighting stance. "This is a tomb, and it's time to bury what's left inside it." The battle that erupted in the Chamber of Authority would be remembered as the moment when heaven finally fell to earth. The five elders weren't just administrators. They were among the most powerful fighters in the world, their abilities honed by centuries of secret conflicts and political necessities. But they were fighting an enemy who represented something they'd never truly encountered, someone who'd tasted absolute power and chosen to give it up. Someone who understood their system intimately but refused to be defined by it. The fight raged across the chamber and out onto the palace's highest balcony, where all of Mariejois spread out below them. The city was burning now, not with the flames of destruction, but with the light of liberation. Everywhere, people were emerging from hiding places, slaves throwing off their chains, revolutionaries opening prison cells, ordinary citizens finally daring to believe that change was possible. "Look around you," the sword-bearing elder snarled as he pressed his attack. "Look at the chaos you've unleashed. This is what happens when the natural order breaks down." "This isn't chaos," Luffy replied, dodging the ancient blade by inches. "This is freedom, and you're right, it is messy. It is complicated, but it's better than the alternative. Better than peace, better than stability, better than slavery wearing a crown." The final exchange came as the sun reached its zenith above Mariejois. Luffy's Gear Fourth Punch met the combined might of all five elders simultaneously, their clash sending shockwaves across the entire city. When the smoke cleared, only one figure was still standing: Monkey D. Luffy looked out over the liberated city, his crew gathering around him as they'd done so many times before. But this time was different. This time, they weren't just ending an adventure, they were beginning a new world. "So," Nami said quietly, surveying the wreckage of 8 centuries of absolute power. "What happens now?" Luffy smiled, the expression carrying all the hope and uncertainty of someone who just helped birth something unprecedented. Now, he looked out at the city below, where former slaves and former masters were working together to build something neither had ever imagined possible. "Now we figure out what comes next." Together, in the distance, the sound of chains breaking echoed across Mariejois like the sweetest music ever composed. Heaven had finally fallen, and from its ashes something better was rising. 6 months after the fall of Mariejois, Luffy stood in what had once been the Chamber of Authority, watching delegates from around the world argue about agricultural subsidies. It wasn't exactly the dramatic culmination he'd expected from overthrowing 8 centuries of divine rule, but somehow it felt right. Real change, it turned out, was less about epic battles and more about boring committee meetings where former enemies had to figure out how to share resources without killing each other. The Alabasta delegation raises a valid point about water rights, Robin was saying from her position as mediator, her calm voice cutting through the increasingly heated discussion. "Perhaps we could table this for now and move on to the maritime trade regulations." "Seconded," came a voice from the back of the room, and Luffy turned to see his father entering the chamber. Dragon looked older than he had during their confrontation months ago, the weight of rebuilding rather than destroying etched into the lines around his eyes. "Dad," Luffy nodded as Dragon approached. They'd been working together for months now, but the easy familiarity of a normal father-son relationship still felt foreign to both of them. "Son," Dragon's smile was genuine if tired. "How are the negotiations going?" "Slow. Turns out it's a lot easier to tear down a system than to build a new one." Luffy gestured toward the delegates, who were now arguing about fishing quotas with the same passion they'd once reserved for matters of war and peace. Who knew that former pirates and revolutionaries would have such strong opinions about municipal sewage management? Anyone who's ever tried to change the world without becoming the thing they were fighting against. Dragon settled into the chair beside him, and for a moment they watched the proceedings in comfortable silence. "Your mother would be proud, you know." Yeah, the mention of his mother still sent a pang through Luffy's chest, but it was getting easier. "Even though I destroyed everything her family built, especially because of that. Celestia always believed that people deserved better than gods and kings making decisions for them. She just never figured out how to make it happen." Dragon's voice grew soft. "You did what she couldn't. You found a way to tear down the old system without replacing it with something equally broken." It was true, though the process had been messier than anyone expected. The world government's collapse had created a power vacuum that dozens of factions had tried to fill. For a few chaotic weeks, it had looked like the liberation of Mariejois would just lead to a different kind of tyranny. That's when Luffy had made the decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He'd refused to lead. The Fishman Island representative is asking about your availability for the trade summit next month, Robin reported, approaching their corner of the chamber. Apparently, there's some dispute about underwater mining rights that they think requires your personal attention. Tell them I'll send Jimbei, Luffy replied. He knows more about Fishman Island politics than I ever will. They specifically requested you, something about needing the Admiral's personal authority to legitimize the agreements. Luffy sighed. Even 6 months later, people still wanted him to be their king. They'd given him titles: Admiral of the Allied Fleets, First Citizen of the Free Territories, Liberator of the Oppressed, but he'd turned them all down. Not because he didn't care about the responsibility, but because he'd learned something during his time as a celestial dragon that most leaders never figured out. Real power came from knowing when not to use it. I'll write them a letter, he said finally. Explain that Jimbei speaks with my full authority on maritime issues. If they need my actual presence to feel secure in their decisions, then they're not ready to be making those decisions themselves. It was a hard lesson, but a necessary one. The new world they were building couldn't depend on any single person, no matter how charismatic or powerful. That way lay the same trap that had created the celestial dragons in the first place. Sir, a young former Marine, technically, since the old military structure had been dissolved, approached with a communication device. Priority message from Impel Down. It's about the Pirate Empress. Luffy's attention sharpened immediately. Hancock had been rescued during the liberation of Mariejois, but her months of imprisonment and torture had left deep scars. Physical ones had healed quickly enough, but the psychological damage was taking longer to address. Put her through. Hancock's image appeared on the screen, and Luffy felt his chest tighten at what he saw. She looked better than she had in months. The hollow look was gone from her eyes, and her famous imperious expression was starting to return. Luffy, she said simply, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not becoming the monster they wanted you to be. For choosing to save everyone instead of just me. Her smile was soft, vulnerable in a way that very few people ever got to see. I know what that choice cost you. It had cost him everything, really. His simple dreams of adventure and treasure. His easy relationship with power and authority. The comfortable certainty that came from seeing the world in terms of heroes and villains rather than complex people making impossible choices. But he'd gained something too, something harder to define but infinitely more valuable. Are you happy? He asked. Really happy, I mean, not just putting on a brave face. I'm getting there. Hancock's expression grew thoughtful. It's strange, you know, for years my hatred of the celestial dragons defined me. Now that they're gone, I have to figure out who I am when I'm not angry all the time. And who is that? I don't know yet. But I'm looking forward to finding out. Her smile brightened. What about you? Any regrets about giving up your crown? Luffy looked around the chamber, at the delegates still arguing about mundane but vital issues, at his father reviewing agricultural reports, at Robin patiently mediating between former enemies who were slowly learning to be allies. None, he said firmly. This is better than any crown. After the call ended, Luffy found himself drawn to the chamber's main balcony. Mariejois spread out below him, but it looked nothing like the pristine monument to power it had once been. The streets bustled with activity as former slaves worked alongside former nobles to rebuild their city into something that served everyone rather than just the privileged few. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still injustices that needed addressing. But for the first time in 8 centuries, people had hope that those problems could be solved through cooperation rather than conquest. Contemplating your legacy, Doflamingo's voice came from behind him, and Luffy turned to see the former warlord approaching in chains. The past 6 months had not been kind to his cousin. Stripped of his kingdom and his power, facing trial for decades of crimes, Doflamingo looked like a shadow of his former self. But his smile was still sharp, still predatory despite his circumstances. Something like that, Luffy replied. What brings you here? I thought your trial wasn't until next week. It's not. But I wanted to see this place one more time before. Doflamingo gestured vaguely with his shackled hands. Well, before they decide whether to execute me or just lock me up forever. What do you think they'll choose? Execution, probably. I've done too much damage to too many people for mercy to be practical. Doflamingo's voice carried no self-pity, just matter-of-fact acceptance. Though I have to admit I'm curious about something. What's that? You had everything, cousin. Absolute power, divine authority, the ability to reshape the world according to your will, and you gave it all up for. This, he gestured toward the bustling city below. A bunch of committees and compromise and bureaucratic inefficiency. Was it worth it? Luffy considered the question seriously. It would have been easy to give a glib answer about freedom and justice and doing the right thing, but Doflamingo deserved better than that, even if he was a monster. Ask me in 50 years, he said finally. When we see whether the world we're building actually works. When we know if people can really govern themselves without gods and kings telling them what to do. And if it doesn't work. If it all collapses into chaos and someone worse than the celestial dragons takes over, then at least we'll have tried something different. At least we'll have proven that change is possible, even if we couldn't make it permanent. Luffy met his cousin's eyes. That's more than your way ever accomplished. Doflamingo was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he began to laugh. You know what the funny thing is? I think you might actually succeed. Not because you're stronger or smarter than everyone who came before, but because you're stupid enough to believe it's possible. His smile turned genuine for the first time Luffy could remember. Maybe that's what the world needed all along. Someone too naive to accept that things can't change. Maybe. For what it's worth, Doflamingo said as his guards arrived to escort him back to his cell, I'm glad you chose this path instead of mine. The world deserves better than what I would have given it. As his cousin disappeared back into the palace, Luffy found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him here. The revelation of his heritage, the temptation of absolute power, the slow corruption of his ideals, and finally the moment when he'd chosen to be himself rather than what others wanted him to become. It hadn't been clean or easy or particularly heroic. Real change never was. Captain, Nami's voice interrupted his thoughts. We need to go. The Sunny's ready to sail. Luffy turned to see his crew assembled behind him, not all of them, since some had chosen to stay and help with the rebuilding efforts, but enough for a proper adventure. Zoro was checking his swords with habitual precision. Sanji was balancing supplies for their upcoming journey. Chopper was practically bouncing with excitement at the prospect of exploring new islands. Where are we headed? He asked. Does it matter? Usopp grinned. The Grand Line's wide open now that the world government isn't controlling all the trade routes. There are probably islands out there that haven't seen visitors in decades. Plus, Frankie added, I've been working on some modifications to the Sunny. Want to test them out in proper adventure conditions. It was tempting. After months of committee meetings and diplomatic negotiations, the thought of simple adventure was incredibly appealing. Just him and his crew, sailing toward whatever horizon caught their fancy. But there was one more thing he needed to do first. Give me an hour, he said. There's someone I need to talk to. Luffy found St. Mjosgard in the palace's memorial garden, a place that had been created to honor the victims of celestial dragon rule. The older man was sitting on a simple stone bench, staring at a wall covered with named slaves who had died in the dungeons, revolutionaries who had been executed for their beliefs, ordinary people who had simply been in the wrong place when a world noble decided to exercise their authority. Regretting your choice? Luffy asked, settling beside his grandfather. Every day, Mjosgard replied honestly, but not because I think it was wrong, because I didn't make it sooner. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men trying to process the weight of their shared heritage and what they'd chosen to do with it. The trials are going well, Mjosgard said eventually. Most of the former celestial dragons are cooperating with the truth and reconciliation process. They seem to understand that acknowledging their crimes is better than the alternative. And the ones who aren't cooperating will face justice through the traditional courts. Though I suspect many of them will choose exile rather than face the consequences of their actions. Mjosgard's smile was sad. Cowardice was always our family's greatest weakness. Not all of you were cowards. No. Some of us were monsters, some were victims of the system we created, and a very few were people who tried to do better despite the circumstances. Mjosgard looked at Luffy directly. Your mother was one of the latter. I hope I managed to be one too in the end. You saved my life when I was a baby. You could have let them kill me, but you chose to protect someone you'd never even met. That takes courage. Or guilt. I knew what we were doing to the world, and I did nothing to stop it for decades. Saving one child doesn't balance those scales. Maybe not, but it was a start. Luffy stood, extending his hand to his grandfather. And sometimes a start is all you need. Mjosgard took the offered hand, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. For a moment, they stood facing each other, the last celestial dragon and the one who had chosen never to be one at all. Take care of yourself, grandfather, Luffy said softly. The world needs people like you to help build something better, and it needs people like you to remind us why we're building it. Mjosgard's smile was genuine. Wherever you're going, whatever adventures await you, remember that you carry all of our hopes with you. I will. The Thousand Sunny sailed away from Mariejois as the sun was setting. Her crew gathered on deck to watch the Holy Land disappear behind them. But this time, Luffy felt no sadness at leaving. This time, he knew he'd be back whenever the world needed him. So, Nami said, consulting her navigation charts, any particular direction you want to explore? That way, Luffy pointed toward the horizon, where the evening star was just becoming visible. Let's see what's out there. That's not very specific. Best kind of adventure, Zoro observed. No expectations, no predetermined outcomes, just us and the sea and whatever we find along the way. Like old times, Sanji agreed, lighting his cigarette with obvious satisfaction. Better than old times, Robin corrected gently. Because now we know who we really are. Now we're choosing our adventures instead of stumbling into them. As the Sunny caught the evening wind and began to pick up speed, Luffy felt something he hadn't experienced since before Ace died: pure, uncomplicated joy. Not the intoxicating rush of power or the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled, but the simple happiness that came from being exactly where he belonged with exactly the right people. Hey Luffy, Chopper looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. What do you think we'll find out there? Luffy grinned, the expression lighting up his entire face. I don't know. But whatever it is, we'll face it together. Even if it's dangerous, especially if it's dangerous, that's where the best adventures happen. As the stars began to appear overhead, Luffy took his position at the Sunny's bow, feeling the familiar thrill of possibility that had always marked the beginning of a new journey. Behind them, Mariejois' lights were fading into memory. Ahead of them lay the vast ocean and all its mysteries. But for the first time in his life, Luffy understood that the real adventure wasn't about what they might find out there. It was about who they chose to be along the way. He was no longer Pirate King. That dream belonged to a younger, simpler version of himself. He was no longer a celestial dragon. That identity had been abandoned along with everything it represented. He wasn't even really an admiral or a liberator or any of the other titles people tried to give him. He was just Monkey D. Luffy, captain of the Straw Hat Pirates, sailing with his family toward whatever tomorrow might bring. And that, he realized, was the freest thing anyone could possibly be. The wind filled their sails, carrying them toward the horizon where anything was possible. Behind them, the old world continued its slow transformation into something better. Ahead of them, new adventures waited in the darkness between the stars. And somewhere in the space between past and future, Monkey D. Luffy finally understood what his brother had meant when he'd said to live without regret. Freedom wasn't about doing whatever you wanted. It was about choosing who you wanted to become, and then having the courage to be that person no matter what the world threw at you. The Thousand Sunny sailed on through the night, carrying her crew toward whatever dawn awaited them beyond the horizon. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Luffy looked forward to finding out what came next. After all, the best stories were the ones where you didn't know how they ended. And this story was just beginning. What a ride, man! Watching Luffy almost lose himself to power, then claw his way back to being truly free, that hits different. Drop a comment which part broke you, the Hancock situation, when he nearly bombed that island. Or maybe when he finally said screw it to the whole system. Subscribe if you want more twisted One Piece scenarios, and I'll see you next time. Peace.